Hello listeners and welcome to the Tyrantcast. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I present you with the 18th episode of a podcast-style, primarily audio discussion topic-centric video series, and for today's episode, in this post-Legions of Death environment, it's just me and the Traxxas sector's single most popular Warmaster. So, Sam, how are you? How have you been? And what have you been up to lately?
Mitch, I'm good, man. I'm just, same old work, family, conquest. So the Black Crusade Spring 2016 season Swiss rounds have come to a close since we last casted.
Don't I know it?
Yes, indeed. Well, we both kind of finished on a bit of a dud, I suppose, but I did win my last two in a row to get to 20 points, but what I've called the fifth Chaos God, she who schedules the strength, was not favorable towards me because I was I missed the top cut by strength of schedule. I think I finished like maybe 8 or 9 or 10 off, something like that. I was in like the low 40s, 42, 43, something like that. So
out of like 187 people, though, that's not too shabby by any means.
Yeah, I can't be too sad. I think I was in the top 25 or 22 or something %. So
I'll take that, especially after I kind of had a rough start. So, yeah, that's wrapped up, though. So, we got the top 32 out there. A few games have already been underway. A couple upsets, actually, already. So that's kind of crazy. And Paul Steiner did his March Madness style bracket challenge, so I think we got about 15 or 20 guys in there, and I'm sure I'll do as well as that, or I'll do not as well as that as I did in the actual playing because I'm not good at these brackets. But what's been up with you, man?
Well, I guess, before I do my spiel, do you want to call it now? Do you want to announce your hypothetical winner, your most likely candidate to take the spring championship?
Well, I picked Travis, I Fight Dragons, because he knocked me out of the top cut last season, and he's a hell of a player. He just won his regional, and out of all of us that, Mitch and I and Guy Lev and John Gobey and Travis and Parker, we're all like on a, whatever Facebook thread that we all talk to each other daily, and Travis was and Joel too, Joel from up in the Pacific Northwest, where we all finished not in the top cut except for Travis. So I just thought, for the sake of rooting for someone in our little thread community, I would pick him. So hopefully he'll win it, but we'll see.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see. That's very good of you. I totally skipped Travis when I was trying to think of who my most likely winner would be. I think I would have to go with Corvus, just because I recently witnessed a game where he knocked Davis out of the tournament. Well, he didn't eliminate Davis from the tournament, but it was basically whomever won the game between Davis and Corvus, only one would advance, and then the other would not make the single elimination portion of the tournament. But Corvus has won twice. He's a spectacularly talented player, so if I were a betting man, which I'm not, my money would be on him. But you happen to mention that you won your last 2 weeks worth of games. I lost my last 2 weeks worth of games. But if you were to ask me what I've been up to in the past couple weeks, since we last recorded, I've played more Conquest LCG in the past 2 weeks than I ever have before. I, of course, did my Black Crusade matches, but I also went to the regional championship over in Tacoma, Washington, where I met Joel, that you mentioned, and I met the Omega Sector gaming crew, met a whole lot of people, and out of the 31 people that turned out for that tournament, I ended up taking the runner-up position, so I got second place, and that was the first time I've ever played Conquest in person in like a, not just a complete joke game environment. So it was a great experience. I'm sure I'll speak at great length about that in our extended Tales from the Tabletop segment, but Sam, both of us were eliminated from the Black Crusade. Neither of us made the top cut. I had a hell of a game against a Octagon user Intolerance from for my very final match. It was the first time I'd ever played against Zogwart, and I guess he actually showed up at my regional and made top 4. But over the course of
that same guy, Intolerance?
Yeah, same guy.
Did he play Zoggy at the regional?
He did. So he took the Orks to top 4, which was great. And then my game against him, it was an hour and 50 minutes long. But in the end, I ended up losing. So that was a bit of a bummer. But all the same, it's a little bit less anxiety I'll have to deal with being forced to play Conquest at the grueling pace of 1 time per week. And then I guess I've done most of my final exams. So for the college term, I've got my last final exam the morning after we record this episode on June 8th. So then it's all done for summer. I've got huge plans in the works for the channel. I'm sure I'll do some entertaining stuff offline as well. And all in all, things could scarcely be better. So all is well here. But, Sam, as usual, we've got a lot to cover in today's episode. We actually have a lack of news for once, so we get to go back and do a bit of a retrospective. Some time ago, we talked about the Howl of Blackmane War Pack in the same vein as the look back at the packs that the Winvasion podcast used to do for Invasion LCG. We'll do that for the Scourge, the war pack that released Ku'gath Plaguefather today. I guess I was astounded to learn that the Jungles of Nectavus is already shipping now, so maybe by the time you listen to this episode, we'll have the complete spoilers available online, and I'm sure within, a week or 10 days of our recording this episode, you'll probably have the first war pack of the Death World cycle available in retailers everywhere. We haven't really seen many spoilers from it, but courtesy of the Russian community, a fellow named Pavel Ilichev, who's a regular he shows up a lot in the videos I get from the Russian community. Anyways, they've got 2 spoiler cards from that same war pack, and then really, that's all we have to cover. So, Sam, I'm probably going to be talking too much shortly, but in our Tales from the Tabletop segment, I suppose, what are some memorable games you yourself have been playing?
Yeah, I've just been trying out new stuff. I think I'm 0-3 with Enriquer. Haven't really got the hang of him yet. I'm trying this mono theme, which might not be smart. But I've been trying some elite heavy decks. I had it was funny, last night I played as Barstool with a Smasha No Mercy deck against a guy playing Ku'gath, and both of us dumped our hands at the end of the game. I ended up barely beating him on the 5th planet, and we both had Smash in our hands, and neither of us ever played it. So it was kind of anticlimactic. And then we had a rematch, and I played like a Mavros Elite deck. And I never got Backlash off, but he was dumping that Smasher like left and right. And like twice, I just loaded all the damage up on the Elite unit in my HQ, and then just played fallback. So like it really didn't hurt me too bad other than a resource.
Yeah,
so,
no kidding.
I ended up kind of rolling in that one. And as far as like specific games, I'll try to keep it short because I want to hear about your regional, and that's more memorable than random Octagon games for our listeners too. But in that in my last Black Crusade match, going up against user Caillou, I think is his Octagon name, and it was close. Like he played Ragnar. I was still sticking with Zarather. Oh yeah, I lost the top Zarather by strength of schedule also. So
nice.
That was great.
A real feel-good experience there.
Yeah, it was a nice double whammy. But yeah, so first turn he was kind of like, or when we were deciding the mulligan, he was like, I don't know. I think I'll keep. What the hell? And he played whatever Blackmane's sword or whatever the hell it's called, Frostfang.
Yeah.
And then he played Ragnar's War Camp. Those were like his first 2 moves. And I was just like, oh, shit, he's going to hunt me down. And as Zarather, there's not a lot you can do against Ragnar with initiative and those 2 cards out.
Yeah, that's a lot of outgoing damage.
Luckily, he did not catch me on the first commit. We were a planet apart, and he did not have a Blackmane's Hunt. And so I was able to avoid that. And then turn 2... I got out an Ardboys, and then turn 3, I got out a second Ardboys. And I just kind of like, I didn't mind neither of us were doing great on command. It was kind of like a 50-50 split, and so I didn't mind just going to that planet every time and hiding behind the Arboys. And I never even got out of Plague Beast, which was odd, but I still somehow was able to just kind of eke it out and hide behind those guys for the rest of the game. So it was a pretty good game, but I was able to eke it out in the end.
Nice.
But no top cut, but it was a good finish to the season. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't make top cut either, but I've certainly been left with nothing but fantastic learning experiences. So just actually getting in some games is always rewarding in and of itself. So even if strength of schedule came back to fail you, I still think you did supremely well. So
thanks.
But I guess from my experience the past couple of weeks, I mentioned that Zogwart game was incredibly long. But
there's no time limits if anyone's wondering out there, how that could happen. There's no time limits in Black Crusade, just because Octagon, can be cumbersome to communicate. So
sure, and I think for once in my life I was actually the faster player, so I'm gonna go ahead and blame Zogwart for taking so long, but of course all is well, and it certainly did not feel like 2 hours when we were playing it.
Takes time to herd all those runts, I suppose.
Right, sure. Too many goddamn Snotlings tokens is all I'm gonna say, and I was just very wowed by how effective Snotling attack was at turning a planet where I was going to eke out a narrow victory into all of a sudden I'm just going to get slaughtered. So it was a fantastic game. I'd never played against Zogwart before, but just trying to optimize what you're attacking when, weighing, do I want to kill economy units versus Snotling tokens versus this and that. It was just an incredible learning experience and spectacularly well played game by him. But much more interestingly, for the first time in my life, I actually went to an in-person conquest tournament. So my regional championship took place in Tacoma, Washington, at a place called the Evergreen Tabletop Expo. And I knew that the event was going to be taking place at about 4 p.m., so I did the intelligent, reasonable thing, and I woke up at 5 in the morning. I did some homework. I went to my biological chemistry class. I went to the gym for about 90 minutes, and then it was Memorial Day weekend, so the drive to Tacoma ended up taking about 2.5 hours. But when I finally got there, I met up with a few gentlemen from the Omega Sector Gaming crew. They sometimes send me videos. They have a website where they post articles and all sorts of good stuff like that. But I met Thomas Wyatt Milor, Ryan Morrell, Sean Atherton, and a few other individuals as well. So we all kind of carpooled together to the tournament, and it was supposed to start at 4 o'clock, but it actually ended up starting late. The tournament organizer kind of did a lot of odd things. So we started almost an hour late, and then when I was going into the tournament, a lot of people were concerned that I'd be too slow and my matches would, run to time before I finished them, because on Octagon, I used to be a really slow player. But the tournament organizer would kind of let a match go to time, and then if people were still playing, he'd just kind of encourage them to play a little bit faster. So, as I'll explain a little bit later, the tournament ended up going extremely, extremely late. But my very first match of the day, I showed up with the same Broderick War deck that Travis McDaniel put together for me that I've played to pretty reasonable success in the Black Crusade. I played against one of the Omega Sector Gaming guys. So like I said, 31 people there. The first match was against an Eldorath Vehicles deck, and the planet flop was, the first two planets were Yvarn and Iridial, the Tricon planets, healing and putting units into play. And the very first thing he did with initiative was putting his signature unit, the Starbane's Council, at planet number 1. So immediately it was like, okay, I'm not going to go there because I don't want to get exhausted and just butchered. And we did the first round. I think I went to Barless or something like that. I focused on economy, getting him to discard cards, kind of played a slower game. And then the next round, it was the same exact thing, where it was Starbane's Council and a Warlock Destructor at planet number 1. So I just kind of let him keep wasting resources, putting these units out to the first and second planets. I was able to build up at like planet number 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I just beat the shit out of his exhausted units. Like, I let him make as many mistakes as he would. I think at one point he used a foresight to send his warlord to a planet that only ended up denying me a single resource. So it was just kind of some sketchy play on his part, and by doing the whole card choke thing, I was able to figure out exactly what he had in his hand and what his options were, and it was a really cool experience playing in person, because all of a sudden it was like all of this anxiety that I normally feel when I sit down to play a Black Crusade match was like suddenly gone. So, like in person, I'm a really tall fellow. I'm pretty athletic and fit and whatever else. And I feel much more confident against someone in person than I do across a computer screen. Like, it's no, chess world champion or no deep blue computer that I'm playing against. So it's like, okay, it's just like, not speaking about Ryan specifically, but it's like, okay, I'm just playing against some nerd. Like, maybe,
right, it's just another guy.
Yeah,
it's another guy
like
at the store. Yeah,
exactly. So all of a sudden, it was just this totally relaxed atmosphere, and I was able to just kind of extend my win condition as necessary. And something I feel that I did, which was very sneaky, is at one point he forgot to move a Trailblazer, a Vashiya Trailblazer with a drone defense system from, say, Planet 4 to Planet 3 or something like that. And I had initiative, and obviously he wanted to show up with my Warlord train and kill some of my exhausted units. And
did he have drone defense on the Trailblazer?
He did, yes. So he forgot to move it, and I knew he wanted to, so I was like, hey, by the way, do you want to move that? Do you want to mobile it over? And he's like, oh, yeah, fuck, thanks, man. Thanks for reminding me. And then immediately it was like, okay, suppressive fire. And then I had the opportunity to kill it, and that was just hilarious.
Yeah.
So stuff like that was a lot of fun, and that's not necessarily something that would happen on Octagon. And then just let me say, troop transport when you're up against Eldorath and there are 2/2s, that is just fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the first game ended up being a win. I just had to block him from winning on planets like 3 through 6, and that was cool, and it was somebody I had at least met, so it was like a nice little dip my toes in the water experience where my first competitive game ended up going just fine. For game number 2, I was actually up against Nahumek, and I want to say it was like the day after Legions of Death was like retail released everywhere, but this was against Thomas Wyatt Mellor, kind of the person from Omega Sector Gaming I'm closest to, and it was kind of funny being paired against like 2 of the people that I carpooled there with.
Right.
But his first action was a Staff of Command, so he was able to get out multiple factions. He was running a Space Marines, Tau, and Eldar Scout type deck with Tombblade Squadron, and a lot of it was just deploy stall as long as possible, don't play 1 hit point units until he had actually passed.
Yeah, kind of like not letting that Tombblade do his thing.
Exactly. I mean, if you don't let it kill off all your vulnerable units, then it's essentially just a floating piece of garbage jumping from planet to planet. But what was rough about that match is he immediately got that first turn Staff of Obedience. That was a deploy stall each and every round, whether he was playing 2 factions or not. And then the second round, he actually got out Obedience as well, which is his signature support, and that ended up being a bit of a pain in the ass. A lesson I learned was he would always use Obedience at the onset of the command phase to move a unit from his HQ to a planet.
You mean the deploy phase?
Yeah, or no, sorry, right.
The HQ phase, gotcha.
Well, sorry, command phase. Like before he chose where his warlord went, he'd
Oh,
move one of his units.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, right. So he'd move it from the HQ to a planet where it's ready and not exhausted. So I know at one point I had a promotion in my hand. If I'd have played it during deploy, I'd have won command, but because I didn't think to do that, I ended up losing command. So
Right.
that kind of sucked, but it was lesson learned. And just over the course of the entire tournament, it was really cool that I would just have some experiences where it's like, okay, I made that mistake once, and now I'm never going to make it again, which is cool, and which is part of the reason why I think if I actually played more games, I'd be a pretty decent player. But as of the second turn, he was already able to get out 3 different factions, and just having like an auto-killed anxious infantry platoon was pretty rough. Reanimation protocols was pretty annoying as well, but I was able to play smart, play the command game when possible. I just played the longest game that I could, and I was able to bloody his warlord thanks to a preemptive barrage, and just through smart play, I was able to do some really cool stuff. I think at one planet, and there was like a little crowd gathered around because, I was like, oh, it's the Hive Tyrant, which was interesting, just some people recognizing me, but I think it was like he sent his warlord to the same planet as my warlord, and I did a summary execution to turn the planet green, then I blew up a troop transport for 2 units, and then I did preemptive barrage, so it was way more damage than he anticipated.
Sure.
And everybody was like, oh shit, and, just...
It's a nasty play.
Yeah, everybody was fitting to go buck wild, but it was a lot of fun, and I bloodied his warlord, and then it was another Planet 6 victory, but it was like my first 2 games had gone 50 minutes, and it was just funny because I'd never played more than 1 game of Conquest during the same day before, but it just felt like I was totally calm and in the zone throughout almost all of the entire tournament, so it was a fantastic experience. My third round, I was up against Archon Selene Morn, which was another warlord I'd never played before, and much to my surprise and kind of excitement, I was at the top table, so they took us over to like some special area, and unfortunately it was not streamed, but on the very first turn of the game, I ended up going for like a command snipe, and it was a not first planet, green planet, and I got to do like a Sakalim's Finest at Barless or something like that. So that was fantastic. And whereas my first 2 games were, friendly people that I knew, the third round was a little bit odd because there was a little bit of, BM or bad manners stuff going on. Like at one point he played a Cabalite, and he, 10 seconds later was like, oh, I forgot to collect my resource. Do you mind if I do that? And I was like, oh, of course, feel free to do that. I don't want to win through some like, oh, I'm an asshole type play.
Sure.
And then, of course, later on in that match, when I had a unit destroyed and I forgot to trigger my commissarial bolt pistol, he was like, oh, sorry, man, it's a tournament. Can't let you take anything back. So it was like, okay, I get how it is. So that was another,
rough. I mean, that's rough. Like, I learned that lesson at Worlds. You just don't give takebacks. I mean, if he had have given me one first, then I would have, just like in your case.
Sure.
But yeah, that's too bad.
Right.
But top table, you guys are both 2-0. I'm sure he was feeling the pressure.
Oh, for sure. But that was, just another one of those, like, I guess you could call it N=1 learning experiences where all of a sudden it's like, okay, the mercy is gone.
Right.
So later on in that same match, when he did some ambushing of Shadowed Thorn's pillagers and forgot no fewer than 4 times to trigger his Cabalite Harriers, like, believe me, I did not say a word.
Correct.
So that was fantastic, just seeing him miss so many triggers. But at one point, he had something like 10 resources. I was just doing the kind of card denial game, lots of commits to Barless, and I would have to say the play of the game for him was probably blowing up one of my Steel Legion Chimeras that had a single point of damage with a Clavex War Leader, which is a unit I don't have a lot of experience playing against. The biggest battle of the game, he had like 2 Cabalite Harriers at a planet and his Warlord and some Clavexes and stuff like that, and one of those he had a Solarite Avedis, and it's a complete nightmare of a unit. But one of those Cabalite Harriers he had a bodysuit, and my play of the game, which I feel spectacularly proud of, was I had a whole bunch of units at the planet. I did preemptive barrage. I was able to do enough pressure on his Warlord to force his Warlord to leave the planet, and then the instant that Archon Selene Morn retreated, it was the Emperor's warrant to exhaust Solarite Avedis, and then her damage killed a Cabalite Harriers that had Shadowed Thorn's bodysuit on it, so it couldn't cancel a not attack source of damage. It was killed, and then I just hit Solarite once, and then I hit her again, and again, kind of another, my opponent going on tilt moment was I dealt lethal damage through an attack to Solarite Avedis. Her reaction should not trigger to that. He insisted that it did, and we had to call a judge over, and the judge was like, Mitch knows what's up, so I'm gonna rule, basically he took my side. So I was like, yeah. And that was pretty baller. But, I guess one other thing worth mentioning is during that match, that back-to-back Shadowed Thorns Pillager, that was resulted in bloodying my Warlord. So it was a very cool game. But I think for having my Warlord bloodied maybe 3 or 4 or something, I came back and just crushed Archon Selene Morn, which felt good. And I think he ended up scooping quite a bit before I actually would have won. So that was kind of a cool feeling, and finishing early was nice for once. But the fourth round, I was paired against a fellow playing as Chaplain Mavros, and he goes, hey, do you want to intentionally draw so we can be guaranteed into the top cut? And Joe Huber was also at the event. He was the gentleman who knocked me out of the Winter 2016 Black Crusade, so it was kind of ironic that he was playing in the same tournament. I was hoping not to be paired against him because he's a really, very talented player. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I suppose I'll intentionally draw. Joe Huber ended up drawing with his opponent, so the 4 of us, all doing the intentional draw thing by the rules, just made it into the top cut. So it's kind of a shitty thing. I'd have much rather played the game, but I came there for the playmat, so I did not want to risk it. But I had made top 8, so the goal of the entire trip, let me remind you, I suppose was 1, don't feel shitty because the community knows that I had the opportunity to go and I didn't want to miss out on it. And then, of course, goal number 2 is win a playmat. So I did.
Which you did by getting top 8, right?
Which was pretty superb, and I got my little Necron acrylic tokens that I'll probably never use. But for the top 8 game, I was pit against card game DB user Grimbo, and he was playing Subject Omega. That's another Warlord I'd never played against before, but like I said, I just felt in the zone. I tried to play as long a game as possible. He ended up infesting planet number 1, planet number 2, and I didn't want to take any stupid unnecessary risks by contesting those. I think I put a Talarn Raider out at a planet. He ended up sending his Stalking Lictor opposite that unit, and I had set my Warlord up with a troop transport, and it was I want to say it was maybe a round 1 dead Synapse unit, which really sucked for him.
Yeah.
I just kept denying him cards. At one point, he had something along the lines of 18 resources, and let me just say, another lesson learned, if anybody ever asks to use dice against me, I am just not going to be okay with it, because the opportunities to cheat when he had these tiny little D6, not to say he cheated or anything.
Sure.
But
no.
I mean, it's just I didn't want to pay attention to it.
Yeah, they can get knocked over. They can get bumped.
Yeah.
And it's tough for me to I don't want to sit there and count dots and do the math. It's just, I'm with you. I hate dice.
Right. So, I mean, it's just, of all the sketchy stories I've heard of someone paying for a tactical squad Cardenas with this resource token counts as 3, and then I'm gonna I don't know. It just leads to all sorts of possible sketchiness. So
Sure.
I'm sure he was a fine player, but I just am not about dice at all. But anyways, at one point he did like a Gene Stealer Harvester, chaining to another Gene Stealer Harvester, then chaining to another Prowler. But I was able to play the economy game because, go figure, Subject Omega ambushes. He doesn't exactly like sprinkle units throughout the battlefield.
Right.
I know there was the big battle of the game. I ended up bloodying his warlord, but before that happened, he did what did he do? He did an ambush of a Yumgarl factor on one of his harvesters, and that was when he had 18 resources, and I only had 3 units at that planet, so the fact that he could have given it like plus 36 hit points was just like absolutely crazy. But that was the first game that I managed to get a forward barracks out, and because I could survive 1 attack each round, it was like eventually I'd be able to kill off this unit. So I did eventually win that one, and then I guess after enough rounds had gone on, it just became impossible for him to win with the economy discrepancy I was making for the two of us. He did get his signature attachment out, and just a little note for myself is that Subject Omega loses his ability when he's bloodied, because my opponent was going to ambush a Prowler, and I totally spaced it, but a spectator was like, "You can't do that!" So I totally forgot about that, and then the signature attachment also reduces a unit's HP.
Right.
So just something for me to keep in mind for combat math. But I made it to the top 4. That meant that I unlocked one of those special promo Nahumek cards, which was cool.
Nahumek Spot Gloss achievement unlocked. Baby.
Right, which is like as thick as a credit card or something ridiculous. So
it's like one of those Amex Blacks.
Yeah. So that was just some more icing on the cake, but my top 4 game, which I was kind of shocked that I'd done that well, it was against Packmaster Kith, a fellow named, I believe, Mark Payment, had driven down from Canada to participate in this regional, and I've got the spectacular track record of never having won a game against Packmaster Kith in my life, out of about only 5 games or something, but I wasn't feeling confident about that game. But man, oh man, like it just ended up being absolutely ridiculous. I don't remember the details too well, but just so many bizarre plays. I managed to eke out the victory by 1 guardsman token, managed to kill a bloodied Packmaster Kith, and that was without forward barracks, so it was just an incredibly close game, but some of the highlights were I used an Inquisitorial Fortress to rout a 1 hit point Chimera Master just so I could win a planet. I triggered Yvarn to put a Steel Legion Chimera into play, and all he got was a Chimera Master. At one point, he bloodied my Warlord by putting 2 Shuriken Catapults on a Chimera Master, so that totally came out of nowhere, and I thought that was going to cost me the game, but I did kind of another little sneaky thing where that was the decisive battle of the game. Things were really back and forth. He was nearly out of cards in his hand, and I was doing this thing where I was like, my Warlord being bloodied from hail to like 0 out of nowhere was definitely a surprise, so I kind of used that as an opportunity to use this like, well, I've already lost, like things are hopeless type, like I wasn't lying.
You kind of swing for the fences all or nothing.
I mean, it looked like I was defeated. My back was broken, or it was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that kind of thing. And I was attacking some of his like token units, trying to get him to waste a bunch of shields, and I just had this look of defeat on my face. And then he like killed some unit of mine, and then it was like, oh, okay, I'll put an Elysian Assault Team into play, I attack your Warlord, now your Warlord is bloodied. So it was like this nice little like gotcha back situation.
Right.
And that was a weird game because there were like no resources for the entire game. It was all cards. And then I'll just say another thing to be aware of is that Chimera Master does not generate a Chimera token if it's put into play at an HQ, because that's not a planet.
Correct, yeah, because it's like at this planet, which...
Yeah. Right. So you've been a great sport so far, Sam, listening to me prattle on, but my story is almost done. I mentioned that the tournament started late, and the tournament organizer was weird about letting the lunch break go long and people playing their games long. So at this point, it was 11:30 p.m. I'd been up since 5 in the morning, and I was feeling I was feeling
Right.
really vitalized. Like in between matches, I was doing like up and down stairs and drinking Red Bull analogs and having protein bars and blah blah blah. So I was feeling really good, and I was like, okay, I'm in the finals now, let's like get it done. And then the tournament organizer's like, well, it's 11:30, the center closes at midnight, we're not going to have time for the game, so can you guys like come back tomorrow or Sunday? And it was like, well, listen, dude, I don't want to drive 5 hours just to come back to play one game, or no offense to the Omega Sector Gaming guys, but I don't want to like stay in somebody's house I don't know, and they've got cats and I'm allergic to cats. So Joe Huber ended up being the player I was pit against, and we ended up kind of bargaining with this guy, and at like midnight we drove off site to play the game at someone's house. And I will say that the tiredness had started to catch up with me at that point. It was probably like 12:30 by the time that we started playing. Oof. And like just a couple examples of some really stupid things I did. Like, I wasn't feeling good going into the game because he was playing Broderick War, I was playing Broderick War. I've never felt good about a mirror match ever, and, I don't, like, I think a lot of people in the community assume I'm a better player than I am. Like, I understand a lot of fundamentals, but there's a lot of stuff I feel like I struggle with, so I didn't favor my odds going against this individual, even though I'd made it to the finals. We're playing the game, he's got initiative, my hand kinda sucks. My opening deploy was forward barracks, which was superb, and I was hoping that would kind of like crush his spirit, but he had initiative, he had Death Corps engineers at the first planet, so they could attack, block me from winning that. Because they could be sacrificed, I didn't feel comfortable playing like an ammo depot that could have been destroyed. And just to give an example of like this stupid ass mistake I made, it was round number 1, planet number 1 was Taurus. And it was like, okay, my unit count is 3, my opponent's unit count is also 3. I've got 3 units, my opponent has 3 units. I've got 3 units, my opponent has 3 units. He passes, and I immediately play a unit at, like, planet number 4. So it was like, fuck. The instant that I did it, it was like, what am I thinking? And I was intending to let him win the first planet. So first turn, he got Taurus, and then it was all downhill from there. So I just got absolutely slaughtered. And it was like I had that one dumb play, and then I did a couple other kind of dumb things. And again, I don't want to blame tiredness or anything like that, but
sure.
It was just bad. Like twice, it was he dealt 3 damage to some of my snakebite thugs or something, and I would just put 1 damage token on them because I was like, oh, 4 minus 3 is 1. So it's like I wasn't operating at full capacity. So
sure.
But yeah, I ended up losing it right at my moment of glory. I was like, man, this will make such an underdog story to tell. It'll be Mitch, the Hive Tyrant regional champion, but like, it was not meant to be. So at about 1:30 or so in the morning, I was doing my like 2.5-hour drive of shame home. So what was really a shame about it is I feel, in hindsight, really proud of how I performed, but in the moment, my final match was just so god-awful, I really let that soil the entire experience. So that was a bit of a bummer, but kind of the community reaching out and doing their like, hey, you did so well thing was really nice. And Davis Kingsley, who took second place at the 2014 World Championship, even he like wrote me this personal message, and he was like, hey man, I can attribute most of my internet fame to this one time that I got second place at an event. And I was like, well, thank you, Davis. Like, that really helps put it into perspective. So
sure.
In hindsight, I feel pretty good about how I did. So for my first ever tournament, 2nd out of 31 is none too bad. And even though I'm friends with a lot of people that are champions, 31 is a little bit higher than, say, 13 or 17. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the bigger regionals. I mean, they didn't have 31 at FFG,
Yeah,
So
yeah. So
yeah.
I feel good about it, and more than anything else, it was a fantastic experience. I learned that when it comes down to it, it's just a frickin' card game. Like, we're all just nerds. So
Sure,
it
just having a
was,
good time.
yeah, it was just a nice, low anxiety experience. But that was the game, and now I'm trying to figure out if I'm making plans to, take second place at the Worlds 2016 tournament. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
yeah. So, like I said, Sam, you've been a hell of a sport listening to my big, giant story. But moving this episode straight along, the most exciting news item on the docket is we have 2 spoilers from our sure-to-be imminently upcoming Jungles of Nectavus. So thanks again to the Russian meta and Pavel ilichev in particular for providing us with these 2 Space Marine spoilers. But Sam, why don't you introduce us to the first of these?
All right, we've got the Valkyrie's Pattern Jump Pack. It is a 2-cost Space Marine attachment, 2 shields, loyal, deep strike card. It has the War Gear trait, the deep strike cost of 0, and it says, obviously, deploy this card face down for 1 resource. That's what we know will be called putting into reserve.
Right.
And when the battle begins, you may pay this card's deep strike value to turn it face up. So in this case, 0. And it says, attached to an army unit you control, attached unit gains flying. So for $1, you can sneak this little thing onto a unit and give it flying. So, how about Fire Drake Terminators with flying, or Blood Angel Veterans with flying? I mean,
yeah,
it's just for $1, this seems like a pretty strong card, and it's another quality 2 shield card for Space Marines.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even think or notice the fact that it is a 2 shield value card, so that just seems nuts. But yeah, I mean, Fire Drake Terminators, you want to attack them as few times as possible, and when it's a flying unit, all of a sudden maybe you're going to have to attack them twice as much, or more than twice as much, because shield cards kind of do like double duty for you almost. I guess something worth noting is if this is on a Blood Angels Veterans, the enemy unit declares its attack, its damage is halved. Then you assign damage, you cut a point of damage off from the reaction, and then you have an opportunity to shield. So this just seems like it could be an absolute nightmare played at Planet Number 1. And of course, we've got our upcoming epistolary visual to debut in Death World Pack 2, and every time you deep strike a card, you draw a card. And if he's got Fool Garrus equipped, then he gets +1 attack and +1 HP until the end of the phase. So this just seems like an absolute nightmare of a card. And I think, Sam, there was a certain Tau unit you were all excited about.
Oh yeah, man. Tau, Fire Warrior Elite. That card is it's not great. Like in the vacuum, it's not a great card, but it's a good card. I've seen it played. I play it sometimes. And it's 3 costs, 1 command, 1/5, and then it basically has to be, you can declare it the defender when your opponent declares an attack against another unit you control. So slap this thing on that, and now it's a 1/5 with flying that has to, absorb all the damage. They got to get through that thing first. So
yeah,
also another great target for this.
Yeah, a couple other things I was kind of thinking about is, like, even though this doesn't have the Space Wolf trait or anything like that, clearly Valkyrie refers to Space Wolf, lore, fiction, whatever, and
Sure.
It depicts a Space Wolf on the card, unless, that's just some random Space Marine wearing, like, pelts and with a big wolf head emblazoned on his shoulder pad. But I was thinking Lone Wolf might not be the worst target in the world for this, because you could hunt the enemy warlord where you've got a 3/3 flyer that can reposition itself, and the amount of damage you can just cut off could be nuts. Like if your opponent attacks you for 2, you cut it down to 1, you discard a promotion and you take no damage, swing in response for 3, and even though it's kind of a very community maligned card, even the Mordecai Rune Priest I was thinking would be decent, in that for, albeit the cost of 4 resources plus this 1 cost attachment, you've got a 3/4 that flies, but whenever a non-Space Wolf retreats from the planet, you deal it a point of damage, so it's like your opponent either has to sit there and fight this 4 hit point flyer that swings for 3, or they retreat, and even if they do retreat, they still take damage regardless. So there's just a lot of interesting new tricks that kind of come into play, and while there's certainly a lot of obvious combos with this card, like the Terminators and the Blood Angels Veterans, I still think there's also going to be some stuff that people weren't expecting happen.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
Super cool card, and I look forward to what people do with it. But what's our second and ultimate spoiler?
Yeah, this kind of fitting right in with visual here. This is the 3-cost Space Marine Army unit, 8th Company Assault Squad, 1 command, 3/3. So it's just straight up on the vanilla test here. It's not loyal. It has a deep strike cost of 2, so there's no net discount here with this guy. It's going to cost you 1 to put it in reserve, 2 to put it up. But it's got the reaction, after you deep strike this unit, ready a target Space Marine unit at this planet. So obviously this is really only going to affect units that come in your Warlord train to a planet from HQ.
Right,
But, a 3/3 for 3 is fine, and if it's readying another unit of yours, maybe it's readying that Honored Librarian or that Blood Angel Veteran or, the Fire Drake Terminator or whatever it is, that's pretty solid. So it's a cool little card, I think. And again, if you're playing it with visual, he triggers his reaction, and if he's wearing his sword, then he triggers that reaction. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I think some other interesting stuff, like before you talk about combo potential, like you mentioned there's no deep strike savings. Normally you get like a discount of 1 resource or something like that if you deep strike a deal. But for this, like let's say during deploy you've only got 1 resource left, but if you know that you're going to earn 2 resources during command, then you're set to end up getting this guy into play. I think this is also useful if your opponent does something like exhausting a unit with Eldorath during the command phase. I just think the most important thing for players to consider, and I'm sure this is something a lot of people are going to botch, is you can only deep strike a card at the beginning of a battle. So it's not like you can't wait until you attack and then deep strike it. But it's a pretty cool card. I know not a lot of people use No Fear to send units from your HQ to different planets so that they show up ready and they can help you win command and they can fight during the first round of combat. But because this deep strike reaction specifies Space Marine unit, it could even be your Warlord. So maybe your Warlord shows up exhausted during command and you don't win command by default, but you can at the very least go into combat being able to swing with your Warlord or being able to retreat with your Warlord.
Interesting. I didn't think about that, but it's a very good call.
Yeah, so, I guess Muster the Guard would also be an option, but then it's, ready a target Space Marine unit, and unless you're running some sort of Sam Mann caliber jank deck where it's like you're a Space Marine player running Muster the Guard, I don't know if that's quite going to work out, but if we see...
That sounds too janky even for me.
Yeah, so if we see even more like Exhaust Your Warlord during the command phase cards or something, then this is only going to get better in value. And I can only hope that eventually we see like a card for each company. Like we've got the 10th Company Scout, so I hope we see the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 9th just to complete the set. So, I don't know, but this is a cool card. I suppose I'm not blown away by it, but it's neat. It's got some, like, warp spawn depicted on the card art, and I like fangs and tentacles and horns. And the Dark Angels aren't too bad either, so cool stuff.
Hey, the other thing I was thinking is tense negotiations. Is that an action?
Oh, yes. I totally had even included that in the show notes and totally forgot to bring it up. As I hurriedly rushed to Card Game DB, it is an action, so that's another...
Yeah, so you could tense negotiations during command.
Yes.
So you could, win command with your Warlord, then during the command action window, play tense negotiations. Then when the battle starts, flip your what do you call it? Flip your guy over here,
Yes.
8th Company guy, and then ready your Warlord.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I suppose it could even be like if you were super tricky, it could even be like winning Taurus, collecting resources, and then having enough to flip this guy over or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
Tints Negotiations is probably one of my favorite. I'll just go ahead and call it a Space Marine card, even though it's a Tau card. So yeah.
You can do that same trick with For the Talva. It's an action as well. So like if you had, I mean, there's not a lot of like Space Marine attachment heavy decks out there.
Yeah.
But if you were running something like that and you had multiple units coming with your HQ, from your HQ in your Warlord train with attachments,
Yeah, like those jump packs.
as a command action, exhaust your Warlord, ready all those guys, then deep strike this dude and ready your Warlord back up.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
makes Visual all the more sneaky, and it makes these Space Marines all the more sneaky. So I am very, very excited to see what this new mechanic adds to the game, because it looks pretty spectacular so far. And then really the only other thing for the Death World cycle here is, our first pack is going to be on retailer shelves. Who knows? Generally, people break street date pretty early, which is a bit of a shame, but, whatever. At least we get to see the cards as early as possible. And
Sure.
people have been talking a lot about this first pack. We haven't had a Warlord spoiled, and people have been talking about, is there going to be a Warlord in the first pack, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever? And it was actually Nathan Gardner, Card Game DB user Warfather, who pointed this out to me. All of the Warlord cards have numbers in sequence. Like, I think Captain Cato Sicarius is Warlord number 1, Strachan is 2, Nozdreg is 3, so on and so forth. Nahumek in Legions of Death is Warlord 25, Onrakir is 26, and then Visual is 27, but we don't see him until Pack 2. Grigory Maxim is 28. We see him in Pack 3. Xeris, Illuminor Xeris, is 29 in Pack 4, and then Jane Czar is going to be 30 in Pack 5. So if this pattern stays true, it's looking like we probably won't see a Warlord in Pack number 1. We'll see one Warlord each in packs 2, 3, and 4, and then packs 5 and 6, maybe they're just going to be a ton of Warlords, or we might go through the entire cycle without each faction getting a new Warlord. So I suppose any thoughts on what you would like to see, Sam, in regard to signature cards, non-signature cards?
Well, I'm okay with this. If this is true, I'm okay with that because these Warlords have been coming out, hot and heavy. So a little break would be okay because it's like, I still haven't even picked up a Farrenhal deck yet,
Right.
and I haven't picked up on Rakir. Nahumek. I've barely picked up on Rakir. I've barely picked up Gorzad. I haven't even played Subject Omega as much as I'd like to.
And I still haven't played some of our core set Warlords.
Right. So there's been so many packs, and obviously, or if the shipping news is true, then there's not going to be much of a break between cycle and box and next cycle, and so I'm okay with that. And that's more like just general card pool love for everybody else. That's probably going to be more deep strike cards for everybody else. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I can only imagine that Pack 1 is going to be all kinds of deep strike cards. I know we've got one Chaos, Elite, Common, Unique Army unit coming out in the jungles of Nectavus, and let me see if I bought myself enough time. Yes, I have. His name is Cethariel the Invocator, so I think it would be cool if maybe in Pack number 1 we got like a Unique Army unit for almost every faction or for most factions, or throughout the course of the cycle we saw like a unique army unit for most factions, just because those are always fun. It's cool to have more cards that are immune to Exterminatus and Doom and Extermination, stuff like that. So I'd like to see that. I'm sure we're going to indeed see just a ton of Deep Strike cards in pack number 1 too. Well, I guess I don't know if we're just going to get a sprinkling of Deep Strike cards or if we're going to see a lot of Deep Strike cards. Like, Space Marines getting a couple makes sense because Visual is coming out soon. We know Chaos is going to be getting a couple Deep Strike cards, and normally Chaos and Space Marines are somewhat similar to one another, like they both go after the same blue technology icons. So I'll just be curious if Deep Strike is like sprinkled at first, or if it's just like, turn on the fire hose and it's all out there.
Well, it would be cool if like everyone got 2 right off the bat in the first pack.
Yeah.
Because then, you have to, you won't know if a faction just gets 1 Deep Strike card, its surprise value is complete shit until they get a second one.
Yeah.
And so, and speaking of Seth, what's his name? Sathiel the Invocator?
Yeah, Sathariel the Invocator.
Sathariel the Invocator, that's what it is. Sathariel. So speaking of Sathariel, not only is he unique, but he's elite. And so, like, unique elites have the most protection of any unit in the game.
Right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that would be cool if we saw some more of those, let alone the fact that he's common. So, I mean, that's just really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, each and every Death World Cycle article has said, more love for elites, more love for elites. So by no means would I be surprised to see things go in that direction. And I guess if you want cheap elites, I guess the other day, months ago now, people were saying, why would you ever play Sathariel the Invocator and not Deep Strike him? I guess it's to take advantage of cards like STC Fragment and whatnot, now that we've had some more of those come out.
Oh, right, yeah, because the STC won't discount the Deep Strike. So.
Yeah, because Deep Strike isn't deploy, it's turn the card face up.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of cool options. It's like, do you want to pay more to get the Deep Strike ability, or do you just want to pay not a lot for a big, beefy, rather protected from card effects type unit? So I think the game is going in a fantastic direction. If it were up to me, I would say slow down the release of Warlords, release a lot of card support to bring our existing Warlords more up to snuff. I think in pack number 2, we've had heavily implied that Yuri and Rakarth is going to get a very powerful new torture event. So if there's stuff for, Strachan, Shadow Sun, Starblaze, those warlords that could really use a little bit of love, well, I guess Shadow Sun isn't that bad, but still, you get the point. I'd like all of our warlords on an approximately equal playing field, so I'm cool with that, and I'm very curious to see what Deluxe Expansion number 3 is, because I have very little idea. Yeah,
I guess we'll have to wait and find out, but I hope it's not like a one-faction box. That's all. That's what I hope.
I hope it's a Space Marines box or a Dark Eldar box, because I don't feel like they're competitive enough right now.
Yeah, or like a Broderick War box.
Oh my god. Yeah, people would shit. It would be like mass community outrage.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Man, oh man. Unless it's like Strachan and the Catachan folk or something. But
that's a good band from the 70s.
Yeah, Catachan folk, man, that's a real hard band name.
Yeah.
But Sam, because for once we don't have like a deluxe expansion or War Pact review, like a new one, we may as well look back at an old one. So in commemoration and honor, in a loving memory of Winvasion, let's do a look back at the pack, a retrospective on the Scourge. This was the second War Pack in the Warlord cycle, our first cycle of War Packs. It was the debut of Ku'gath Plaguefather, our second Chaos faction warlord. Just like with Ragnar Blackmane last time, we're going to touch on a lot of the lore of each and every one of these cards. So Sam, why don't you introduce us to Ku'gath in card form and in character?
All right, well, Ku'gath, he's obviously our second Chaos warlord that came out. Demon and Nurgle traded. 1 attack, 7 HP, 7 cards, 7 resources. His I guess I should mention his reaction. His reaction is after this warlord is declared as an attacker, move 1 damage from this warlord to another unit at this planet. So really strong warlord. I think off initiative he can go toe-to-toe with any warlord. And on initiative, he can probably go toe-to-toe with any warlord, except with maybe the exception of Zoggy. But, interesting, way different than Zerathur. He's not amplifying the damage. He's moving it, and, moved damage cannot be blocked. Pretty popular warlord, not as popular as Zerathur. When he came out to now, I kind of think he hasn't wavered much in his like status or popularity. I think he's overall his decks are kind of generally thought to be clearly below Zerathur, and he's very good and he's very strong, but he's not quite Zerathur strong.
Yeah.
And I think that opinion has actually stayed pretty consistent over the 18 months or so he's been out.
Yeah.
Despite all the changes in the meta and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I love him though. I love Ku'gath. I love playing as him. Very fun warlord. It's great to move all the damage. Obviously, I love to play the whole Dirty Baker's Dozen deck. I still play Ku'gath all the time. But I think he's held up pretty well in the time since he's come out.
Well, I guess just he certainly seems like he has taken a bit of a backseat to Zerathur, but eventually he's one of our warlords that's going to leave in rotation. Someday he's no longer going to be playable, but what kind of play style does he have? Like, how is he different than Zerathur in regard to just deck building and what you actually do with him?
Well, I think in deck building, Zerathur, not all the time, but the vast majority of cases, Zerathur is aligned with Orks. And I think Ku'gath can get away from that. Ku'gath, he doesn't have that damage amplification to get rid of some of the bigger threats, but you see Archon's Terror in Ku'gath a lot, just so that you can get rid of a big threat and then move your damage and spread your plague to little smaller units. Gleeful Plague Beast is good in him, but not as good as it is in Zera. Play style wise, I'm probably not the person to ask because 99% of my Ku'gath games are the janky, 13 army unit deck, games. But so how you play that is completely different than how you play a 25 or 30 army unit Ku'gath deck, which I never do. But I think he mostly goes with Dark Eldar usually, and I think because of that, he has the potential for a stronger command game. But I think that if Barstool had to come out and been badass, it kind of would have hurt Ku'gath's popularity a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think Barstool kind of stinking, at least competitively, has kind of helped Ku'gath maintain a solid second place footing in the Chaos faction.
Well, and I certainly hope that Ku'gath is going to receive some pretty significant support over the course of the Death World cycle. Clearly, the issue with helping out Ku'gath is, like the Gleeful Plague Beast deals damage, so even though it's a Nurgle unit, there's obvious powerful synergy with Zerathur because he amplifies everything. We've seen the Infectious Nurgling that's going to be coming out soon, and that's like a 1-cost 2/1 with Armorbane. Granted, it's got the Nurgle trait, but hey, Armorbane damage, maybe Zerathur amplifies Armorbane damage. So it's just really tricky, it seems, to support Ku'gath in a way that just doesn't make Zerathur even more powerful. But he's certainly got a really interesting tank/bruiser playstyle if you play smart, especially if you get his signature attachment we'll talk about. The amount of damage you can move off of yourself is just absolutely spectacular. His event allows you to just transfer a ton of damage right onto enemy units. So he's very interesting, and in the right situation, he can just be almost unkillable, but if you can front load a ton of damage and you manage to kind of put on more damage than his reaction can remove, you can find yourself really hurting pretty quickly. But let's talk about some of these signature cards. So the community isn't exactly thrilled with his army unit, but what exactly does he have at his disposal?
Yeah, looking back at this pack, it's going to be kind of like a nice rules refresher for some of these cards.
Because they're quite complicated.
Some of them can be. So his 2-cost signature army unit is the Ku'gath Nurglings 1 command 2/2 demon and Nurgle trait. Forced reaction. After a unit moves to this planet, deal it 1 damage. So anytime a unit moves to this planet, which means the planet that the Nurgling is at. So if a unit moves from your enemy's HQ to the planet where the Nurgling has already been deployed, it's a damage. If the enemy warlord commits to a planet and you commit to a planet and this thing is in your warlord train, all of a sudden the force reaction goes off because everyone has moved to the planet and he's there.
Right.
If Sicarius' Chosen hits this guy for 1 and scoots him over, then he moves and now he kills himself. if if any card effect moves him from a planet to a planet, then he hits himself. Or if a Wild Rider comes over, the Wild Rider gets hit. So just remember that any movement to a planet that this Nurgling happens to be at, the force reaction will trigger. Also important to note that your opponent or you will decide the order of his forced reaction triggering based on who has the initiative token.
Exactly.
So because forced reactions are resolved one at a time. So it's you move 5 units from your HQ to the planet with the Nurgling. His force reaction goes off. It is separate. So I'm hitting your Blood Angel Veteran for 1. Do you shield? Yes or no? Assign the damage, take the damage. Next up, I'm hitting your Honored Librarian for 1. Assign the damage, take the damage, shield the damage, blah, 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 blah. So if you have initiative or your Nurgling's already deployed at the planet, this is great. If your opponent has initiative and your Nurgling is moving with 1 damage already on him to the planet, or he's moving in conjunction with another Nurgling, then your opponent chooses the order in which this goes off. And they can make your Nurgling die before he hits them, or before he hits them for all he potentially could had you have been the one holding the initiative. So, if I'm moving 3 units and you're moving 3 units, and your Nurgling is one of those 3 units and he has 1 damage already on him, and I have the initiative token, then I say, okay, your Nurgling goes off. He's going to hit Ku'gath first. He's going to hit the Noise Marine second, and then he's going to hit himself third. And now he can't hit my guys because he's dead.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with this guy. I've seen last night I was playing a game against the guy in Octagon, and the Nurgling bloodied his Ku'gath. He didn't have a shield, and this thing. Well, this is kind of a separate talking point, but I guess I'll just touch on it quickly. Ku'gath sucks for Zerathir. Okay, just the Nurglings make you hit all your own shit for 2. They make your Plague Beast hit all your own shit for 2. It's just not what you want. And this guy can add to that confusion. He's a tricky little card. I really wished his reaction was not forced, but it is what it is. Brad's not taking it back, despite Eric Taylor's pleading with him to do so at Worlds. No errata for this guy. He can be confusing, but you know what? He can be a game winner too. You just have to be smart with when you play him and where you play him. I think you hold on to him until you need him, and then you throw down like 2, maybe 3 at the big last battle. So
yeah, so it's a fascinating little card. It can certainly result in a whole hell of a lot of damage being dealt. We're starting to see more and more mobile effects shift planets during the middle of combat or the command phase type things, like Corrupted Teleportarium, Normal Teleportarium, the Wild Rider Viper, all sorts of these new cards that do trigger moves. So Ku'gath's Nurglings get a little bit better. They get a little bit worse if your own Corrupted Teleportarium is forcing your own units to take damage. But really, with all that rules stuff you mentioned, the biggest things to just take home for everybody are the player with initiative determines the order in which forced reactions are resolved. They're 1 at a time, and as soon as one of these Nurglings is destroyed, then you stop resolving reactions. So you can use the initiative in your favor. Your opponent can do the same, but they're an interesting card. They're a demon, so you can reduce their cost. They're Nurgle, so they've got a little bit of synergy, like in the signature squad here, and I suppose they'd be a recipient for the Blight Grenades, where you could do that area effect too. So I'll just be really curious to see how these guys improve or get worse in time, but an interesting unit. But by all means, let's continue to go through our squad here.
Sure. Next up, we have what I still think it's the best signature attachment in the game, or at least close to it. 1 cost, 3 shields, the Plaguefather's Banner. It is war gear and standard traits. Attached to a Nurgle unit. Attached unit gains +1 HP and reaction. After attached unit is declared as an attacker, move 1 damage from this unit to another unit at the planet. So it's basically the exact same reaction that Ku'gath himself has. I have never seen this thing played on any unit other than Ku'gath. Don't know why you would, but I mean, first turn, it's a great card. I mean, your opponent is just like, dude, even if I hit this guy for 2, he's going to move 2 of it off and hit me for 1 and be fully healthy again at 8 HP, which is already mean for a warlord. It's just the one, you don't see much ecstatic seizures. You don't see much, subdual?
Yeah.
But I've seen even the odds put this thing on a Ku'gath Nurgling, which stinks. But there's for the most part, there's not too many ways to get rid of this thing. And so if it comes out, it's usually there for the whole game. It's just such a good card, man. Like, there's few feelings better playing Conquest than if you're playing Ku'gath and you draw your 7 opening hand cards and you see this card in your hand.
Yeah.
It's just a really, really strong card.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes him seem almost invincible. I've certainly witnessed some really sad Ku'gath games where he's stuck at a planet, like only being able to attack and not trigger his reaction. But if you can orchestrate a situation where you've got the banner attached and it's just your warlord fighting, like, my god. Even a Borkon Recruits hits you for 4, then you shift 2 points of damage onto it. You've only got 2 points of damage on your total pool of 8 hit points. The recruits are immediately dead because you can't shield or prevent moved damage, and then you can attack like another unit, and it is just absolutely nuts. It's just absolutely spectacular. I think the flavor and fiction behind Ku'gath is super cool. He's just dripping with disease and pestilence and just exudes this sense of overwhelming despair and like, you're just going to eventually succumb to this nasty entropic death. And I feel like that is just perfectly just transformed into a card in the Plaguefather's banner here. So I've got to say, one of the coolest cards in the game.
Yeah, and we should touch on the lore because that's, neither of us are big, giant, like, lore, walking encyclopedias like, Carl from from the Traxxas Sector Warcast. But, Ku'gath himself, he was like a little cute Nurgling demon all of his own. And he used to, like, hang out on the shoulder of Papa Nurgle, the oldest and primary chaos god of death and decay. And one day he was just hanging out up there like, a little purse dog. And
like you do.
And Nurgle was brewing up this, nasty concoction of, pus and goo and disease. And Ku'gath was just looking over his shoulder and got too excited, fell inside the big vat, drank deeply of the goo of the potion, and he basically drank up all of it, and it became the living embodiment of Nurgle's perfect and most awesome work. But he basically swelled in power then to become a great unclean one, which is kind of like the end-all be-all of Nurgle demons under obviously Papa Nurgle himself. And now he just kind of wanders through the universe, like, searching for ingredients to recreate this perfect, like, toxin that he kind of inadvertently stole. And he captures people, and then he, like, studies how they degenerate and dissolve. So, I'm not big on... It's kind of why Orks are my least favorite faction. I'm not big on the comical aspect of 40k, and I do feel like Nurgle has some of that, like just the whole Papa Nurgling, and, like, somehow these Nurglings are all death and decay, but they're also kind of like cute little pugs at the same time. Sure. So there is some like whimsical, comedic value to the Nurgle stuff, but it's also just like so sick and gross with the death and rot, and like, you've seen guys like with chain swords in one hand and like holding their intestines in their other. Sure. And yeah, they're it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool little piece of fluff with the whole Nurgle thing.
I mean, people will talk about bolter porn in 40k, and this is, I hate zombies as like a thing. I feel like they're very cliche, and the trope is just way overdone, but Lexiconum is the primary source of all this information Sam and I drew upon to, make this episode more than just us reminiscing about these cards.
No, Mitch, it's my own encyclopedic knowledge of all 40k lore.
Right, of course. course it is. But just some of the descriptors are so poetic and beautiful, like, describing Ku'gath as enormous, bloated, and corpulent, a leathery beast of dead, wet, necrotic flesh, the embodiment of mortal fear, of death and disease. It's just absolutely fascinating. And even stuff like, let's say, his servants see their plagues as gifts that they're giving to the living, that they want to bless them with undeath, and they perceive the agonized screams of those they afflict with these, horrible diseases and pestilence as expressions of thanks and gratitude. Nurglings are concentrated pus and contagion come to life. It's just like, oh man, it's just fantastic. And the 13-year-old in me just eats it up. So fantastic.
Yeah, I'm not a big zombie guy either. I like Walking Dead and stuff, but of your monster of the month Friday night kind of thing, zombies not really that far up there because they're just so generic.
Yeah.
But the whole Nurgling thing is cool because they're also demons and they do have a mind of their own, and they're all jolly and jovial with their plague and their goo, and they have a will of their own usually. So pretty cool stuff. But I suppose we'll move on here to Vile Laboratory. Speaking of Ku'gath and his toxins here, he's got looks like he's about to make some Ninja Turtles with this container of the green ooze. But
right, the mutagen.
Yeah, the mutagen. But he's got the 2-cost support Vile Laboratory. It is a location. Deploy action. Exhaust the support to have your opponent choose and move a non-vehicle unit he controls from a target planet to an adjacent planet of his choice. This is not the strongest support in the game, but it's pretty good. It doesn't do much against Gorzad or Eldrath vehicles, but the other night I actually played it on turn 1 against Gorzad, and I used it every turn somehow. I don't know how. I guess his non-vehicle option choices were limited, so you had to move the Snakebite Thugs down the board every turn. But it's a pretty good card, and you have to be aware of it because I made a mistake playing against it last week where he had it out and it was my initiative, and I had a Khorne Berserker at Planet 1, and I knew he had this card. It was sitting right there in HQ, and some idiot, instead of playing a Rogue Trader at Planet 1 where my Berserker was, I think I played Slanesh's Temptation or something, and he just triggered this, and now here was my fighting unit that I was planning on having, and I had to move it off. So You just got to be careful. If you have a big bad unit you want to be at the battle, your first deploy move should be, if you get to deploy before he triggers this, is put a worthless guy down at that same planet.
Yeah, and given that Ku'gath himself is so formidable in a one-on-one context, if you can force a planet to only have one unit on it, and then you send Ku'gath to that planet, that is immediately a giant pain in the ass.
Yeah, and this thing doesn't it doesn't target either, right? So even if they've blown their whole wad on a frenzied bloodletter or something, this backlash can't save it from this thing because it says pick and choose, not target. So you can get around some of the elite protection out there, or Land Raider protection or whatever. So
yeah, but I suppose to wrap up the signature squad, it's a very cool event, and it's absolutely spectacular artwork of some Eldar, I believe Guardians or Aspect Warriors or something that have been essentially disintegrated into their constituent goo. What's our signature event?
Oh yeah, another one of these best signature events in the game kind of thing here. So he's got a support that's fine. He's got a signature army unit that's kind of but potentially powerful. But then his attachment and his event are great. Fetid Haze, 3 cost, 1 shield, power, and Nurgle traits. Combat action, remove all damage from a target Nurgle unit you control. Then have your opponent deal that amount of indirect damage. Deal the amount of indirect damage equal to the damage it removed among army units he controls at this planet. So, great event. I've seen it used where there's no targets for your opponent to even assign indirect damage to, but it's just a great way to heal Ku'gath.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll pay $3 to get 7 damage off my Warlord, and then that's the end of the action. So, But to keep in mind here, like we're talking about the rules, this is another one that gets tricky, and I think it's been mostly cleared up just because a lot of people have known about it for a while, but I still see the mistake made. Indirect damage, you cannot assign more indirect damage than your units have hit points or hit points remaining. So, if Ku'gath is alone at a planet against, say, a Blood Angel veteran, who, when assigned damage, removes one, let's say Ku'gath has 5 damage on him. You take 5 damage off Ku'gath, you put it back in the damage token bank. Your opponent then takes 5 damage tokens from the damage token bank. He puts 3 of them next to a Blood Angel veteran. The other 2 go back off the table. Of those 3, one of them gets removed because of the Blood Angel veteran's reaction,
Right.
and now only 2 go on him, and he is not destroyed. Likewise, if he's sitting across from an Honored Librarian and you remove 5, it's the exact same reaction, and your opponent can only assign 2, so 3 of the tokens go back, 2 of them stay on the table next to your Honored Librarian, assigned, ready for movement onto the card or placement onto the card, the dealing of it. But if he has one single shield card, he can shield one of those 2, and now only 1 goes on, and the Librarian is alive. Likewise, if you're sitting across from Kith and 4 Chimera tokens, that damage just comes off Ku'gath, and that's the end of the action because there's no army units there at the planet. Tokens cannot be hit by this thing.
Right.
Synapses cannot be hit by this thing. So, gotta keep all those in mind. I've had some guys rage quit on me when they thought they'd blow up my whole army, and they didn't. But, just keep in mind that this thing is very strong, but it's not the be-all, end-all. I'm going to wipe out your board with the 7 damage, or the 6 damage I'm healing off Ku'gath.
Yeah, so it might be a little difficult for it to kill units, but it's certainly great with is Daka, is that loyal?
I don't believe so, but I'll look it up right here.
But Cacophonic Choir can help put
Sure.
a ton of damage on units. Smash a Gun Battery can put a ton of damage on units. And then add Fetid Haze to the mix, and it's just all the more damage that your opponent may not eventually be able to deal with. So it's a fantastic event, just like you said at the very least. It heals your Warlord, it heals your Gleeful Plague Beast. It's a pretty spectacular effect. It certainly comes at a pretty significant expense. But hell, the other day I witnessed a game where Ku'gath was fighting in a planet. He took 6 points of damage, did a Fetid Haze. He took another 6 points of damage, did another Fetid Haze.
Oh my
and
gosh.
just chewed through so many units, it was just absurd. So
yeah, and Daka is loyal. by the
okay,
way.
sure, but Cacophonic Choir works.
Sure,
all that
right.
stuff works. Very cool card, very cool stuff, and I look forward to seeing what happens with Ku'gath in the future. But, Sam, I suppose, why don't you introduce us to our first Space Marine card?
Yeah, we've got the 4-cost army unit Mordecai Rune Priest that you previously mentioned there. 1 command, 3 attack, 4 HP. Psyker and Space Wolves trait, he is loyal, and he has the Forced Interrupt. When a non-Space Wolves unit retreats from this planet, deal 1 damage to that unit. You don't see a lot of this guy. The last time I saw him was when I got a promo copy at Worlds 7 months ago.
Right.
And it is still looking fancy and schmancy in the front of my Space Marine cards that aren't currently sleeved in the little plastic case. But, this guy was kind of a dud thud upon arrival, and he, in my opinion, has stayed as such. I have not seen him played in a long time.
Well, just part of this retrospective thing as we go over the Scourge War Pack is, how were they then? How are they now? Why does this card not see more prominent play?
Well, it's below the vanilla line. It's 1 command 3/4 for 4, which isn't great. And it's Forced Interrupt. It's not great. Like, this thing's got to survive a round of combat for it to go off, which maybe it will with 4 HP. But, 1 damage to everyone on the way out, it's not huge. And a lot of times they're just going to say, okay, why take 1 damage now and then come back to the next battle all bloodied and exhausted when I can just stick around and try to kill this thing or try to win this battle, maybe at a steeper cost, but is it a net steeper cost? So, I don't know. This guy's cool. Maybe if he had 2 command or 4 attack or whatever, he'd be better. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe if they had made him a 5 cost, 1 command 4/5 or 5/5 elite. Like maybe if he had some elite protection where he couldn't be deceptioned or something.
Sure,
I don't know. He's just not great, and he's kind of stayed not great.
Yeah, I mean, like I
Yeah.
mentioned before, maybe the Valkyrie jetpack will make him a little bit more appealing, but I think it all comes down to the fact that if you're terribly concerned about this expensive unit damaging you upon retreat, maybe you stick around long enough to kill him and then you retreat. His forced reaction can even damage some of your own units like Blood Angels veterans, Honored Librarians. We don't have a ton of Space Wolves units, and while they don't take any damage, he can hurt you, he can hurt the enemy. There's not a lot of Psyker synergy, so it's just a bit of a shame that this card, just like you said, was kind of a dud, a dead-on arrival card, and it has never really had any opportunity to really see a lot of prominent play. The fiction is very interesting, like the Mordecai Rune Priests are essentially the Psychers of the Space Wolves. They're the librarian equivalent of the Space Wolves chapter of Space Marines, but what's kind of funny and hypocritical and ironic about the whole situation is that they don't believe that their psychic abilities are drawn from the warp, but rather they're granted by the animalistic spirits of Fenris, the death world which the Space Wolves chapter hails from. Even the Primarch Lehman Russ was in favor of, long time ago in the 30K setting, during the Great Crusade actually, when humanity was trying to spread throughout the galaxy, when the Emperor was considering, should we disband the Librarius of each Space Marine Legion, like should we just do away with Psychers completely, Lehman Russ, their Primarch, was totally in favor of doing that because, of course, he didn't have Psychers, he had these Rune Priests, but they're basically like historians. They do like a record of the chapter in like saga form, it's not written down, and then they fight with rune weapons, which are like psychic charged stuff. They can conjure up howling gales and fearsome ice blizzards as opposed to, shooting like crackling bolts of lightning Emperor style.
Right.
Star Wars Emperor style from
style.
the fingertips.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. But so they're cool guys, but this one does not quite do it for me. But what about our second of two Space Marine cards?
Yeah, real quick on the Rune Priest. The other reason why he didn't work is there's not a lot of like Space Wolf decks out there where like all the army units you're packing are Space Wolves.
Sure.
So if you need to get out of a jam and you've got Honored Librarians and Blood Angel veterans and, I don't know, 10th Company Scouts and eager recruits or whatever, like this thing's just, hitting a lot of your own stuff too. So, right. But we'll move on here to the next card, Fenrisian Wolf, 2-cost attachment, common, 1 shield, creature trait, attached to an army unit. Reaction: after a battle at this planet begins, exhaust attached unit to deal damage equal to its attack value to a target army unit at the same planet. It's a better card than the Rune Priest, probably. I've seen it more than the Rune Priest, definitely.
It's not saying much.
No, I haven't seen it a lot lately. It got some experimental play when it came out. Like, in a vacuum, you're like, this is pre-ranged, right? If they've got a marksman with gun drones on it, I can just exhaust my librarian that's got this thing attached to it and smack it for 4 before it gets a chance to go off. But there's like these little restrictions that, like, when you really think about them, it kind of make this card crummy. Like, it's after a battle at this planet begins. So typically the big fight is usually at planet number 1, and there's no action window to like buff the attack value of a guy, because it's one of these cards where it's actually not printed attack. So, like, if you had, say, a Catachan outpost, you could buff the unit and make it go from 3 to 5 and then do this. But there's no window to do that. There's no window to ambush platform this thing in if it's at the first planet. So it's just tricky. And oftentimes, you're paying the full price for it. Is that worth exhausting your unit just to hit something pre-ranged? If you're not going up against a ranged deck, okay, maybe it's like hitting twice in a row. Maybe it's kind of like sort of outflank them or something, right? But
sure,
it never really got off the ground because of the timing window restriction that's placed on it.
Yeah. I think, like, let's say in a dream situation, you're at, say, planet number 4 or something, and you're able to, like, round after round trigger a battle, and then this keeps working. But what I think would happen more often than not is, like, okay, the unit that has this attachment gets swept up into your HQ during the first round of combat, like a battle begins, and your unit's exhausted because it showed up at that planet alongside your warlord, and all of a sudden your Fenrisian wolf isn't really doing anything for you. So maybe the first time you play this, you'll be able to get some sort of effect out of it, like it's not a war gear attachment, so you could conceivably put this on a vehicle, but it can only affect army units, it can't affect token or synapse or warlord. And it just seems like an awful lot of expense for one outgoing attack that can be shielded against, and it just seems like it's too expensive for what it does. I think it's conceptually cool, but it's a lot more difficult to get to the point where it's effective than at first it may seem.
Yeah, I do. What tell us about our cool fluff though, because the fluff behind this guy is cooler than the card.
Yeah, the fluff is kind of really weird about these things, but it's like the alpha predator of that same world, Fenris, which I mentioned is a death world. So it's like got apocalyptic extremes in like heat and cold. So it might be scalding hot, or if you step outside naked, as you're prone to do, Sam, you're just gonna like your blood will freeze instantaneously or something like that. But they're a fair few different creatures with just tremendous genetic diversity. They're some of the most fearsome carnivores in the galaxy, and they're not just like little wolves. They can grow up to like 8 feet tall at the shoulder, so over 2 meters high. They can be the size of armored personnel carriers, so these are gigantic wolves. And it said specifically that Blackmane Fenrisian wolves, like Ragnar Blackmane is named after, they serve Mordecai, which according to Space Wolf lore is the two-headed guardian of the gates of death in the afterlife. So these wolves are like the minions of this mythological figure. But the biggest and strongest of these Fenrisian wolves can chew through steel. They have several rows of teeth that perpetually grow, just like sharks do. And I guess there's like a slang term or a colloquial term when a space wolf says something is like impossible. They say, well, that would be like taming a Blackmane. So they're interesting little creatures, and I guess some space wolves even like ride into battle on the backs of these. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, pretty cool. Well, Mitch, take us on to the Astra Militarum here.
Sure. So, the first of 3 AM cards in the Scourge is the 2-cost army unit Iron Guard Recruits. They've got 2 command icons. They're a 1/2, and they've got the traits Conscript and Mordian. So, they are pretty much ubiquitous. If you're running an Astra Militarum deck, or you can ally with the Astra Militarum, you pretty much see these. 2-cost, 2 command icons. They trump Void Pirates, Rogue Traders, all sorts of different stuff. They are pretty fantastic. Their traits don't have any synergy to speak of, but what do you think about these?
Yeah, I mean, they're the Chaos Fanatics of the Astra Militarum. They're good. You see them. They're staples. In some instances, they're a little better than the Sanctioned Psyker. I still prefer the Psyker with the 4 HP. It can be a good damage dump for any number of different things. If you're playing Orks with Daka Daka, if you're playing Smash a Gun Battery, whatever. But the one attack is nice. They're more susceptible to getting sniped and killed. But I would have loved it if these guys had the soldier trait. I think that really could have helped Straken early on.
Yeah.
But alas, they do not. But, it's a solid card. It's a solid command capper. You saw it a lot when it came out, and you still see it a lot now.
Yeah, I mean, just like with Rattling Deadeyes, there have been a large number of times where it's like, God damn it, I can't Elysian Assault team off of these guys, or something along those lines. But they're still totally solid, and I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. And I would imagine eventually we'll see some Mordian synergy, probably a Warlord associated with that. And the cool thing about like the whole Mordian thing is that they're part of the Iron Guard. Like, go figure, the Iron Guard recruits are part of the Iron Guard, but it's the Imperial Guard regiment that hails from the planet Mordian. They've got the most intense like training program, the most rigorous training of all of the different Astra Militarum. I don't know if you want to call them like not chapters or legions, but of all the different planets which together compose like the human military of the Imperium. They're kind of the most badass. They're dealt. They're used to dealing with climactic extremes. They kind of govern themselves. They're extremely disciplined. They strictly ration their food, their ammunition. They're extremely loyal and determined and regimented. They're unyielding and dour, unforgiving. They've got extremely precise timing with like the firing of their las guns. And what's really special about the Iron Guard is it's said that their lines will never break. And as the Astra Militarum so often go up against the hordes of demons and chaos, these guys just stand their ground totally resolute, and in the face of slavering demons and all sorts of just nightmares from the warp, they don't break ranks, they don't retreat. It's fight until the last man is standing. So pretty tough fellows. But Sam, why don't you take us through the remainder of our AM cards?
Sure, we've got the Dozer Blade, 0 cost attachment, 1 shield, common, hard point trait, attached to a vehicle army unit. Attached unit gets plus 2 HP. This is kind of, I don't think really knew it at the time, but this is where you kind of saw this hard point thing start, which is like, that's the trait the attachment's going to be if it can go on something that doesn't take war gear.
Right.
Typically vehicles. It wasn't great upon arrival necessarily. You see it a little bit here and there. It's good on a Steel Legion Chimera, so you saw a little more of it once that tank came out. Despite our hope, that whole experimental Dozerfish never really caught on in Starblaze.
Right.
But, and I did have an experimental Dozerfish, Steel Legion Chimera, Dozerblade, Starblaze deck built at one time, but it's not a great card. The funny thing is, this has been pointed out before, and it's still the case today, a year and a half after its release. The best thing to put it on it is an Assault Valkyrie. So it's like this, flying ship in the air with a giant, blade on the front of it, like ready to shovel snow, 25 feet up in the air.
Right, preemptive shoveling.
Yeah, so, it's fine. The 0 cost for 2 HP is good, like we say on this Assault Valkyrie or Steel Legion Chimera. Don't see a ton of it. There's just often not enough space in Astra Militarum decks for this thing. It's kind of like always on the bubble looking out.
Yeah, and really there's not too much to be said about it. Fiction-wise, it's kind of, when I think 40k, I picture tanks that have dozer blades on them. It's kind of everywhere. It's just a vehicle upgrade that allows you to successfully traverse difficult terrain. It just pushes shit out of the way, quite obviously, and I like the flavor text here. It's just, there is no such thing as an obstacle to a dozer blade. I guess that's not quite true, because the obstacle to a dozer blade is that it's not so good that you would really want to include it in a deck. But what's the last of our cards?
Sure. The 2 cost support Inquisitorial Fortress. It is loyal. It is a location. It has the action exhaust and sacrifice the support to rout a target army unit. This was good when it came out. Very good. A lot of people, I do remember hearing like some crying that it was too telegraphed, but that has since gone away. Granted, there is more location and support hate out now than there was when this pack first was released, but routing is so strong, Archon's Terror is so strong. When you can have an Archon's Terror that's telegraphed, but the upside is there's no restriction as far as like, unique or whatever. You see this thing all the time. You see it in basically in every Astra Militarum deck out there. You usually see 1 or 2 copies, if not 3. So I think it was strong when it came out. I think it's only gotten stronger and stronger as Astra Militarum have risen in popularity.
Sure. Astra Militarum have gotten a lot of deploy stall as well, and if you're playing against, say, Space Marines that nowadays have access to Imperial Fist's Devastators, stall, 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 and then once your opponent drops below 4 resources, then you can lay out your Inquisitorial Fortress. So it's great. You can route stuff during the command phase, which is superb. You could even route stuff during the deploy phase if you really, really, really need to win command or something. So it's a very cool, very powerful, versatile support, and it's just pretty superb. I guess you could even use it to get rid of a copy of Siren Zithlex so that you could deploy a bunch of units that don't show up exhausted, so tons of use for it. I've used it to great success myself. Get rid of a Gleeful Plague Beast before it, before the combat phase happens, and it can destroy half of your army or something along those lines. So, great card, I'm a big fan, and these Inquisitorial Fortresses are basically forward bases of operations. Like, some are in secret, some are known, but they are home to torture chambers, prison cells, research labs, and they serve as defensive bastions in some case. They basically provide the Inquisitors, or kind of like secret police of the Imperium, just a base so that they can do all of their rooting out of corruption, heretics. They can investigate demonic incursions and Xenos invasions, and all sorts of stuff like that. Like, they've got a contingent of soldiers associated with them, and full armory and all sorts of stuff. So they're, cool little things, and I suppose it's a decent way of kind of transforming the fiction into a card where you can kind of thwart your opponent's plans with these secret bases.
Yeah, even though they're not secret, they're telegraphed. But
sure.
When you brought up the Gleeful Plague Beast, I think that actually, when that card did come out, it gave rise to this even more so, because this is the only way, I think it's still the only way, to get rid of a Plague Beast before it goes off.
Yeah,
at a battle.
I suppose the only other thing that's coming to mind, which I've done before, is tense negotiations at Farron. But that's pretty corner case. I mean,
pretty corner case
compared to something like this, because a lot has to go right for that to occur.
Right.
But why don't you introduce us to our Orks?
All right, the 4-cost army unit that is common attack squig herd, no command, 4 attack, 6 HP, creature and squig traits, no war gear attachments, and then just some flavor text. So it's a 4-cost 4/6. You're giving up command for the 6 HP. I suppose it's a fine unit, but for whatever reason, it just does not see play.
Yeah.
Again, it suffers from that 4-cost, slot where they can be dealt with without having that elite protection that you have with fallback, or of course now with backlash. But Orks already kind of suffer on command. To dump 4 resources into a no command unit kind of stinks. Yes, this thing can get beefed up, especially in a Nosdrag deck, but you never really saw it, and a year and a half later, we still don't really see it that much.
Yeah, I think maybe the dream is that alongside Nosdrag, it could attack for 9 or something like that. But
sure, yeah.
I just think it's fine. It's just unremarkable, and it just kind of gets ignored. I guess Smash-A-Gun Battery could be interesting in that it's got a giant reservoir of HP to soak up cards, but I don't know. It's just, there's nothing really to write home about this one. The card art depicts several Pac-Men high on methamphetamine, so it's just, I don't know. It's interesting. Squigs are an interesting concept, and there's certainly a ton of them, I guess, in the lore. Squigs are pretty much anywhere you would find orcs, so orcs and orcoid life forms, they just constantly shed spores, and they kind of generate some sort of ecosystem or environment wherever they go. So once a planet is infested with orcs and their various derivatives, it's really difficult to kind of annihilate them or extinct them. And squigs are the simplest version of orcoid life. They're unintelligent, but they can be brutish and kind of ferocious. And the squigs of all the different forms they can take, like some are food, and then some are these attack squigs, which are predators that are basically just fanged mouths sitting atop two muscular legs, hence my Pac-Man joke. And they're kind of like attack dogs kept by war bosses and odd boys as pets, or like you can do some sort of 40k version of cockfighting or Pokemon battling where you have them, fight one another. So squigs are basically just, the whipping boys or punching bags of orcs. And of course, when enough of these get together, as clearly depicted on the card art, they can eat Gretchen. And they're pretty much just primitive, stupid-ass orc attack dogs. And
yeah, I guess like when these war bosses have their squig fights, do you think one says together, like, I see that your squig is bigger than mine, and, and then they call it a day, or I guess they let them go at it?
I can only imagine. I know that the more an orc fights, the bigger it gets. Maybe it's the same thing with squigs, but orcs seem like a society where size definitely counts for a lot.
I think so.
And that is why I will never be an orc. But, Sam, I guess, what do we have left?
We've got Custom Field Generator, belovedly called the KFG, 2-cost support that is not loyal, but it kind of basically is because of its restrictions here. It's an upgrade trait. Reaction. After an orc unit you control is assigned damage by an attack, exhaust this support to prevent all of that damage. Then deal an amount of indirect damage equal to the damage prevented among orc units you control at the same planet as the defender. That is a mouthful. But basically, if your Nazdrag is swung on for 5, you can exhaust this card and then redistribute the 5 points as indirect damage among orc units you control. Again, you can, just like we talked about with Fetid Haze, you can only assign indirect damage equal to the number of hit points remaining on a unit, so one shield can save something. You saw this card a lot when it came out. It's a very strong card. I don't think you see it quite as much now as you used to, simply because, similar to Astra Militarum, Orks are a faction where there's a lot of good supports, and you can only run so many supports in your deck. We've seen a lot of Smash a Gun Battery lately, a lot of Ammo Depot, obviously, and those supports just kind of squeeze this thing out. It's still around. It used to be a 3 of a lot of the times, especially in Nazdrag, where you can beef up your brutal units, or in like Zogwart, where you could redistribute this and ping your run herders to make more snots. But solid card. You just don't see it quite as much as you used to.
Yeah, it's a very interesting effect. It is strikingly similar to Fetid Haze, but I guess really it just kind of comes down to, I think a lot of players are maybe running 1 copy or 2 copies of this in their deck. It just seems like more and more there are a lot of non-attack sources of damage going out.
Correct.
A lot of routing effects, so there's just a lot of ways to handle units. You could move your opponent's units from planet to planet. So there's just kind of a lot less reason to run this card, although it is a very powerful effect. Like the dream situation is somebody swings at your warlord with a frenzied bloodthirster that's, got 7 points of damage on it, and it swings for like 15 armor bane, so you can't shield it, but you immediately prevent all of that damage. You reassign it as indirect damage, and if your warlord only has 1 hit point left, you can only assign 1 point of damage, and then you discard like a 1 shield value card, and that 15 armor bane attack is basically blocked. So the dream is cool, but you don't often get that effect out of it. I think lately I've seen this played a lot, but it just seems like it's doing a lot less than it used to. Mm-hmm. So still a cool card, and it's an interesting concept. Really, all of the orc technology is kind of fascinating in that it's almost like if you believe in it enough, it'll function. They have like a faith-based system of making technology work, which I guess isn't so different from the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus, but these custom force fields are generally used by big mechs, the masters of technology when it comes to orcs, and they just protect themselves and orcs in the nearby vicinity, and it's just basically like a big crackling field of energy that creates a bubble, and it absorbs incoming fire. So cool concept, cool card, pretty much perfect depiction of it. I mean, like, orc stuff can go wrong. It's going to be faulty. It can't prevent all of the damage. So, neat card. And I'll just be curious if this continues to lose favor or if it ends up making a bit of a comeback.
Yeah, be interesting to see. So last up for the Orcs, we have Daka, as we talked about earlier. Obviously, it's loyals. We've just relearned 2 shields, 2 cost, event, tactic, and maneuver traits. Deploy action. Exhaust your warlord to deal 1 damage to each unit. And it's got the great flavor text. Needs more Daka. So I don't think you see a ton of this. You did see a lot of it when it first came out. 2 shields was a good include for a lot of decks. Distributing out damage to each unit when you have these bigger, beefier orc units that can obviously rely on brutal, or for the upcoming Zogwart that was released soon after this pack, that again helped with like run herders. But I think once Cacophonic Choir kind of took hold, that this kind of lost some strength. Not to mention, in the time between this release and now, we've gotten so many other 2-shield orc cards that just kind of seem to be better overall.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting card in theory, and I've certainly seen it do some really dirty things, probably more. I never really used to see it do much, but nowadays it seems like this is the finishing blow sometimes after somebody does a smash-a-gun battery. So you deal damage based on how many cards they have in hand. They get rid of all their shield cards to weather that storm that the smash-a unleashes, and then immediately afterward you can do your Daka, and it's going to be 1 point of damage to each unit, and if they've still got a ton in play, hopefully they don't have any shields anymore. It just really sucks that your warlord subsequently shows up at a planet exhausted. You don't win command. You leave yourself more susceptible than ever to being bloodied or destroyed by Shadowthorn's Pillager or all sorts of different stuff. I suppose even Vesual's Hunters are going to be a bit of a threat nowadays because, like, deep strike cards, who knows if it's going to be an attachment or an army unit or an event or whatever. So You expose yourself to a lot of danger, but you can also use this to pretty superb effect. But Orcs are certainly getting a lot of options when it comes to events, so it seems like in the right deck, this is a pretty reasonable include, but if you're not running something pretty specific, then maybe you sort of steer clear of this one.
Yeah.
And I guess just to touch on the fiction behind it, Daka is supposed to be like the onomatopoeia. That was a word that I learned writing some of these notes for just ranged weapons, like like Daka or whatever. That was terrible, but envision a machine gun or something firing quickly, and that's approximately the sound that it makes. I know I blew everybody's mind by saying that. I'm sure nobody had figured it out, but I suppose
I think the best thing to come out of that was that little thing you just did, because I want you to edit that out and give me that for my ringtone. I think whenever you call me, I'm just going to have that playing. That's awesome.
Sure. Well, Sam, we're about done with our war pack. 3 more factions to go, but what is up for the Dark Eldar? I hear they got at least 1 decent card in this expansion.
They got probably the best Dark Eldar card and the worst Dark Eldar card, all in one little 3-card expansion here. So
how efficient.
Yes. First up, we have the ever popular and hated 4-cost army unit, Klavex War Leader. It is loyal. It is 2 command, 3/3 warrior. You can ambush it in, and it has the reaction: after you deploy this unit during the combat phase, destroy a target damaged army unit at this planet. I don't need to say a lot about this. You see it all the time. You saw it all the time then. You still see it all the time now. It's basically the reason for Backlash being invented. It is strong as hell. Like, oh, you have a 5-cost unit with 3 HP left, and another 5-cost unit that's, got 1 damage on it, ready to jack my whole world up here. How about I pay $4 and I kill the unit that's about to hit me, and then I'll swing and kill the other unit. So strong card, don't need to say a lot about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost always like a 2-for-1, and
Yep.
even if you can't use its reaction to destroy like an Ultramarines Dreadnought, an 8/8 that maybe took a point of chip damage at some point, like, just the amount of headache that your opponent has to go through is just a complete nightmare. Like, whoa, I can't take any damage at all. I have to use all of my shields just in case there's a Klavex War Leader. And even if it can't use its reaction, it's still a pretty powerful ambush unit. So I've seen it drop into play against just a lone Warlord, and a swing of 3 is nothing to scoff at. And I've seen it bloody Warlords without damaging any kind of army unit. So it's very, very strong. It's probably one of the most, just like, out of all the cards that people have complained about being potentially broken and needing to be banned or restricted or have errata made for it, I've got to say Klavex War Leader is at the very top of that list. I'm not sure if it's exactly the best card in the game, because I think that is probably like a more subtle card, like some sort of really, really cheap command unit like recon drones or something more subdued. But it is just a hell of a card. If it sticks around at a planet, it's got 2 command icons, so it's just incredible. And yeah, I guess it's just a total nightmare of a card to have to play against.
Yeah, it's a good card. What's up for the lore here with these cool guys?
Yeah, so the way that the Dark Eldar are organized are into different cabals, and they're generally led by an Archon or something along those lines. And some of these Dark Eldar warlords are known as incubi, and they're kind of bodyguards and personal soldiers that work specifically for the Archon. They have to undergo all sorts of rigorous and dangerous, like life-threatening training, and some of them actually die during said training, and those that don't make it are actually burnt as an offering to Cain, the Eldar god of war, murder, violence, and destruction. And in order to pass this test, each warrior has to go out and they have to kill an Eldar aspect warrior in single combat, and they shatter its soul stone, which condemns the soul of that dead Eldar to be consumed by Slaanesh, who the Dark Eldar kind of have a bit of a pact with. The Klavex war leaders, it's my understanding, is that they're kind of the leaders of these incubus warriors, and they fight with these demi-glaives, which it's basically like a sword that you can snap in half, so you can wield it like two-handed, or you can snap it into 2 individual little weapons here. And the blade itself kind of has like this sickle-shaped curve at the very end of it, which I think is designed to, do beheading and stuff like that. And I think that's really where the Klavex War Leader's ability comes from. So I'm sure I kind of screwed up that description at some point, but Klavex War Leaders they've seen some shit, Sam. So through all those,
and they do the beheading.
Yeah. But fantastic card, fantastic artwork. It made it onto a playmat, so very, very cool. But what else do we have for Dark Eldar?
Yeah, we've got the 1-cost attachment, 1 shield, common bladed lotus rifle, war gear and weapon. Attached to an army unit, attached unit gets +1 attack. If the attached unit is a Cabalite, it gains ranged. So you did not see this thing at all for a long, long time.
Right.
And you were just now starting to see it in the last couple months with, the release of Archon Slain Morn. And even there, this thing's not like an auto include. But obviously you've got Cabalites in your deck, and +1 in ranged is pretty fair for 1. So, again, don't see a ton of it, but maybe we're going to start seeing more of it.
I would imagine so. I guess originally we had like the Cabalite Halfborn, which was like a 1/1, so it's like, oh gosh, it's a 2/1 with ranged for a card. Cool. Or we had the Sybarite Marksman, which was a 2/1 for 1, but then it doesn't benefit from the ranged keyword because it already has it.
Already had it.
But nowadays we've got the Flayed Skull Slaver, and that can be a 3/3 with ranged, which is pretty respectable. Or we've also got that Dying Sun Marauder, which becomes a 3/3 range that, whenever you gain a resource, you can ready it, so you can bladed lotus rifle it, it can fire, you can raid, it readies, fires again, you do Shadowed Thorns Pillager at a red planet, Archon Slain Morn gives you a resource, it readies again, then it fires again. So there's some cool Hypex Injector-esque synergy available with this card now. So, seems pretty reasonable, and I guess I'm a fan. It seems like when we started to get this big gush of Cabalites, it saw a sudden resurgence, and now it's kind of on the back burner again. So
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see if it, really has its day in the sun, or whatever you want to call it. But Cabalites themselves are kind of a step down from the Incubus Warriors and, of course, the Clavax. They're like the basic soldiers or grunts of any Dark Eldar cabal, and anything that's too important to allow a slave to do wrong, the Cabalites take care of. And as is kind of a common trend with Eldar and Dark Eldar, they go for dexterity over defensibility. And their typical weapon, unlike the Eldar Shuriken Catapult, is called the Splinter Rifle. And those are Cabalites.
Cool. All right, well, next up, we've got the event Soul Seizure. It is 5 cost, 1 shield, common, tactic, and torture traits. Action. Put a target army unit with printed cost X or lower from your opponent's discard pile into play under your control at a planet. X is the number of torture cards in your discard pile. Okay, I do. This card stinks, but I have to apologize to the card because at first I was thinking this is the what the hell is it called? Dark Possession.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I was thinking this was that, but they're like two stupid Dark Eldar events that you never see, and so I just got them confused.
Right, so you're taking back calling this the worst Dark Eldar card.
I am taking that back. It is not the worst Dark Eldar card, but but it's up there. So yeah, it's definitely up there because 5 cost is a lot. Even in Urian, the problem was you never saw this until Urian came out, which was 4 packs later, 4 months later.
Yeah.
And then even with Urian, it's $4, from X or low. You just. How many torture cards are you really going to have in your deck? In your discard pile at any given time. Maybe in the late game you'll have a lot, but it's X or lower. So it's like you still see a lot of decks where the highest cost card is 3.
Yeah.
In your opponent's discard pile. So now you're paying 5 to get a 3 cost unit conditionally, and you're paying 4 to maybe get a 4, but I've never seen that happen. It's just, I don't know. I don't have much to say about it other than it's not great.
Yeah, this is like the dream for this card is great. You've got a discard pile loaded with torture cards, and I guess it's worth mentioning Suffering has the torture trait, even though it's not an event.
Correct.
So maybe you can hit big with Frenzied Bloodthirster or Gleeful Plague Beast or something along those lines, but Urian is I think he's the only warlord we've seen where his signature army unit doesn't have any command icons to speak of. He's only got 2 of them, so he's not winning a lot of resources. He's not drawing a ton of cards. This costs 4 even when you're playing it with Urian, and what if your opponent doesn't have anything decent in their discard pile? Or what if it's just not worth doing? So it's cool that you can do this as an action, like in between command phase and combat, but this is just a kind of underwhelming effect. It's awesome that you can replicate it with the Ichor Gauntlet, but again, it just seems like it's too swingy, it's way too inconsistent, and when you're relying on your opponent's deck for how good your deck is, I just think that spells kind of a really uncomfortable situation that I would prefer not to find myself in.
Yeah, maybe there's room for this thing to grow, because here we are, like a year and a half after this thing has come out, and maybe like now, elites are going to become, like a little more prevalent in the meta, and so maybe, you can snag a 6 or 7 cost unit out of the discard pile for 4, but even that seems corner case, and like you say, when you're relying on your opponent's deck to make yours better, that's a tricky situation.
Yeah, and some of the more competitive versions of Urian Rakarth do that Hypex Injector combo.
Right.
And when you're saving all your torture events to be played at one time, like maybe you've got a cool opportunity to steal something, but you just don't have those torture cards in your discard pile because they're in your hand.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not sold on this one. It's a sweet card from a lore standpoint. Homunculi, like Urian Rakarth, are the Dark Eldar masters of pain, agony, and manipulating things on kind of a molecular level. They're, flesh twisters and flesh shapers. They've actually got these very cool things called soul traps that allow them to capture the soul of a vanquished foe, and they're like prisms or runed skulls that are kind of designed in such a way that they allow their owner to steal the energy or soul of their victim, and it's kind of like eating someone's heart where you become stronger. It's like their soul gives you power and strength, so it makes the collector a more powerful entity. So I could, I don't really know that much about Urian Rakarth in the fiction, but based on how these soul traps read, it seems like he could indeed be like a just tremendously powerful individual. But I suppose, Sam, we're already almost done with this pack. The Eldar get some, I was going to say interesting stuff. Maybe interesting is fair. I was going to say like good or something committal like that. But let's stick with interesting. So what's up with Eldar?
Yeah, so we've got the 2-cost army unit Black Guardians. No command, 2/4, Warrior and Ulthway, easy for me to say, Warrior and Ulthway traded, and then just some flavor text. So you did not see a lot of this guy at all for a long, long time. 2-cost is good, and 2/4 is good. I mean, you can say, hey, he's got no command, but he makes up for that with 2 extra HP on the vanilla, baseline. But Eldar are so good at command, and they're dependent upon command so they can pay for their tricks, like their gifts and their, get their card draw, like so they can get nullify or whatever. It's like no one wanted to take a 0 command Eldar unit, but your 2 for 2/4 is solid, and I think we're starting to see more of them. I've seen a little bit of them in Teleus decks, because, like the dream scenario, a 3/5 for 2, who gives a shit about command at that point, for $2, totally. So maybe we'll start to see a little more of this guy, because we already have a little bit, and maybe that'll continue.
Yeah, I think the major issue with this guy is he came out in one pack, and then I think pack number 3, Gift of the Ethereals, is where Warlock Destructor met its debut, and it's, a 2-cost 3/4 with a command icon. It's got a little bit of a detriment to it, but who cares if it dies during the first round of combat? I definitely think that stole the spotlight from the Black Guardians.
Yeah.
But they're a warrior, whereas the Warlock Destructor is a psyker. So these guys are nowadays Shuriken Catapult eligible. But if you're paying 4 for a 5/4 with no command, yeah, I don't know, but they're a very interesting choice. Alongside Dire Avenger Exarch, they might allow you to stomach a lot of incoming damage, but then again, your opponent can just kill the Dire Avenger Exarch first. So they're an interesting enough card. The fact that they're a warrior not only synergizes with Taliesin, getting that benefit from her, but that Wisdom of the Serpent support can allow you to search for them. So they're an interesting card. They're definitely something to consider. I think really the community champion of these is George Tinkham, who we had on to do the Decree of Ruin review. But I don't know if even he is quite as fond of these guys as he used to be.
Yeah.
So, a lot remains to be seen, and just writing out some of these lore notes, something that I was completely oblivious to, is I guess the Guardians are actually a civilian defense force. Like, they're basically a militia, they're, kind of volunteers. And the Black Guardians, what's special about them is that craft world Ulthway, they're the only craft world that I believe has a standing army of these Guardians, because they're so, like, Ulthway itself is so close to the Eye of Terror, they have to deal with a lot of demonic incursions and fighting off demons and warp spawn and all sorts of stuff like that. So these Black Guardians, they're the only Guardians that have their armor dyed jet black. They're basically just a standing military force with these black uniforms to represent the Eldar color of mourning. So because the Eldar are kind of a dying species as a whole, it's just to, I suppose, pay respect to all the dead and everything else. And just the Eldar, their style of fighting, they use the webway to kind of teleport from here and there to show up anywhere on a battlefield, and then they're trained to, fight with heavy weapons, light weapons, so they're a very diverse, relatively speaking, well-trained, civilian-esque fighting force. But what are our other couple of cards?
Yeah, we've got the one-cost support, Dome of the Crystal Seers. It is loyal, it is a location. Interrupt, when you search your deck, search an additional 3 cards. This seems like a cool effect for one cost. You saw a little bit of it when it first came out, like an experimental play. You've got the Swordwind Farseer, which is gaining some re-energized popularity with Taliesin and her Psyker synergy. So this could go well with them. Obviously, a lot of times Eldar do ally with Tau, and this would be a great card for the ECT to search for attachments and search extra cards. But for whatever reason, it never really caught on, and even in Taliesin decks with that Swordwind Farseer, I haven't really seen much of it.
Yeah, there's that Wisdom of the Serpent synergy where it's you search the top 6 cards of your deck now for a Psyker or Warrior. There's the, I think you said the planet Eloith, but this is just kind of an underwhelming effect. It's like when you draw a card, you probably don't want to see Dome of Crystal Seers. It doesn't really cost much, but it also doesn't really do much. I suppose It's also a location, so maybe it's going to get blown up by an Imperial Fist's Devastators that otherwise wouldn't have done anything. So just some minor points. It's nice that it doesn't exhaust, so it's not targetable by the Death Corps engineers, but it just seems like a really underwhelming card, and I'm not a big fan. I'd more like to include stuff that'll help me generate tempo and really outcompete my opponent, as opposed to risking, can you even imagine having a couple of copies of this in your mulligan hand, where it's just this is complete garbage. So that just sucks. So I don't know.
That's sick.
Of all the interesting things that Seers could do, this is probably one of the least interesting. But again, the fiction, Seers are Eldar that utilize vast psychic powers, but without the fear or worry about attracting demons or accidentally creating warp rifts like the Imperium is so worried about citizens doing. They've got a lot of abilities ranging from healing to arranging particulate matter into buildings and bridges, what is it called? Warp? No, it's not. Wraithbone. Yeah, Wraithbone is what it's called. Sorry there. But anyways, they can do telekinesis, all sorts of cool stuff. But it looks like our developers decided to do Dome of Crystal Seers, where you can sit and meditate, and you're not killing, you're not fighting, you're just digging through your deck a little bit more.
Just digging away.
Yeah, and I think the worst feeling in the world would be like including this in your deck, and you look at like the top 3 cards or whatever, and you get to look at additional cards, but it doesn't matter because the thing that you wanted was in like the top 3. So I don't know, not thrilled about this one. I don't know if there's going to be too much room for this one to grow, but perhaps someday I will eat my words.
Well, we'll see about that.
Yeah.
But next up, we have the 1-cost event, Death from Above. 1 shield, not loyal. Tactic, deploy action. Put a non-elite mobile unit into play from your hand at the last planet. And it's got what looks to be like a dark Eldar scared shitless of, Big Bird flying down on top of him or something. Right. But, you saw this when it came out. You saw it, well, not when it came out, but once Baharoth came out, you saw this.
Right.
And, a few packs later. And you don't see a ton of it. You still see it in Baharoth from time to time. But other than that, man, I don't know. It's pretty slow, right? Like, yes, the ideal thing would be, you get a 2-cost Vasha Trailblazer or a Baharoth's Hawks or something, and you get them for $1 at the last planet. But you got to wait a while for them to kind of do anything other than just command. So it's a discount, but you're spending a card to get the discount, and all you're going to probably really get out of it for quite some time is potentially a command win. So. Yeah, you don't see a ton of this thing.
Yeah, speaking of cards you don't see a ton of, it works pretty well with the Piranha Hunter, the Tau mobile unit, which can shift from planet to planet, and each time it does so, you can draw a card, but I don't think that has any printed command icons.
You are correct. It is a 3-cost, no command, 2/2.
Yeah.
And I tried this card with Piranha Hunter, and I got it out for $1, and that was great. And I'm drawing cards, but it's like 2 slow play cards working together. It makes a slightly, I don't even know if it makes it a faster play deal. It just didn't really work.
Yeah. What would have been awesome for this card would have been like, hey, Wild Rider Viper for 5 put into play, but it's like, oh wait, it's elite, so it's not eligible. Maybe
Correct.
We'll see some 4-cost units that are eventually, then I could see like, hey, save 3 resources, cool. What if Siren Zithlex is inexplicably at the last planet, put into play, does not count as deploy? So maybe that would be an interesting trick. Baharoth could definitely use some help, and this could definitely make a resurgence based on what exactly he gets. But for the moment, it's like, put a unit into play as far from a relevant planet as is likely possible, and just like you said, I think it takes way too long to get operational. So
it could be better if that horrid Vector Viper squad had mobile on it until it was damaged, as opposed to it gains mobile while it's undamaged.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of was a swing and a miss.
Yeah, so no printed mobile kind of fails there. I guess it's not like they can even be used in the same faction, but that Venomous Fiend we recently saw, it's like if you use a non-Chaos Warlord, then it gains mobile. Like that's another instance of it's not printed mobile, so if somehow these two could be in the same deck, it's like that's another target that's not eligible for this.
Right.
And I think the Venomous Fiend is also an elite, so it's...
Correct. Yeah, correct.
It's just like an impossible situation on top of an impossible situation, but
right. We're trying to make this thing better.
yeah. But I guess swooping hawks as a thing, they're Eldar aspect warriors that are named after wild hunting birds taken from Eldar mythology that contained the spirits of murdered Eldar. Their order was founded by Baharoth, which made sense that this card came out during Baharoth's cycle. He's the winged phoenix, and he's actually an Eldar sufficiently old to have lived through the Fall, which is the event when She Who Thirsts, or Slanesh, the great enemy, was born. They traverse through the skies with a lot of speed and agility, and that's where Death from Above comes from, obviously. And just insofar as weapons, they wield rapid-firing las blasters, similar, but because it's Eldar, it's superior to Imperial las guns. They've
Sure.
got grenade packs, and they're essentially skirmish, harassment, hit-and-run style units. So, again, pretty cool lore, but the card itself maybe falls short of what would be ultimately desired. But Sam, because Tyranids were just a sparkle in my eye at the time that this war pack came out, and the Necrons were, who knows what those were going to be. We've just got the Tau cards left to cover, and let's talk about these.
Sure. First up, we've got the 2-cost army unit Borkan Recruits. It is not loyal. It is common. It's got 1 command, 2 attack, 2 HP, soldier trait. This unit gains +2 attack while it is at a planet with a warlord. So this is one of the ever-popular warlord groupies that came out in this warlord cycle. It's a staple. You see it a little less now than you did when it came out. I mean, you can never go wrong with a 2/2 for 2 that's a conditional 4/2 for 2. You saw it in Space Marine decks, you saw it in some Eldar decks. Obviously, you saw it in a lot of Tau decks. You still see it, but just, as more cards come out, it kind of gets crowded out. It might not be a 3 of every time now, but very solid card.
Yeah, I mean, it's by no means immune to things like Tzeentch's Firestorm, Gleeful Plague Beast, because it's got 2 hit points, but it packs a hell of a punch for a 2-cost unit. It's got a soldier, so in Commander Starblaze, there's some AM synergy it can benefit from, like Elysian Assault teams, and it's just curious to see what happens with this. It's a great platform for an ion rifle, so it's a 2-cost unit that can swing for 7. It's just an all-around kind of a staple, really. What is there negative to say about a cheap unit that can hit like a truck? I don't know. I mean, it's good. I don't really have too much else to say about it.
Solid unit.
It's even common. The lore behind this card is that Borkan is a world within the Tau Empire, aka something they call a sept. It was originally inhabited by a species called the Paktrun, which was the first sentient Xenos race to join the Tau Empire, but this planet, Borkan, was ravaged by some sort of disease that totally killed off the population, and it was subsequently renamed to Borkan. It serves as the center for education of the Tau Empire. It's host to a ton of universities and research centers, as well as the single most prestigious military training center in the entire empire. It was actually a location where the Tau repelled a Tyranid invasion, and they did so with minimal losses. So it's one of the most important worlds to the Tau, and it was kind of interesting to read about just because the Tau, you think of them as some, like, I don't know, alien, like hyper advanced technology, anime, laser shooting people, but it just seems like there's a lot of cultural refinement and sophistication going on behind the scenes that the Imperium totally ignores because they're an alien and they have to be killed.
Right. Well, next up we've got the Black Sun Filter, Mitch. This has made a big impact on the meta here. It's a 0-cost attachment. 1 shield, common. Just got that going for it. War gear, attached to an army unit. Reaction. After an enemy warlord commits to the same planet as attached unit, gain 1 resource. Yeah, you didn't see this much, and you still don't see it at all now. I mean, the only thing I can think good use of, again, this is like you're relying on your opponent to make your deck better.
Sure.
You can't guarantee, especially in the early game or even mid game, where your opponent's going to commit their warlord. You can put it on the big broadside to give it, AOE, AOE 2 for
Sure.
basically the cost of nothing, but it's everybody just rather stick a gun drone on that broadside and hit for 4.
Yeah.
So
a 6-cost area effect 2 unit, man. What's not to love?
yeah, well, but that stacks, right? It gets AOE 2 for every attachment on it.
Yes.
So, if you put a gun drone and this on it, then now you got AOE 6 unit. But AOE 6, but even still, I've never seen this thing, and I just built a new deck last night with that broadside for the first time in a while, and I was like kind of tempted as I scrolled over this card, and then I was like, yeah, no, not going to happen.
And I guess just for the sake of clarification, the Sakea XV88 broadside, it's when it has one or more attachments, it gets area effect too.
Okay, so it does not even stack. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So, sorry, it's been a while since I've played the broadside.
Sure,
so.
And yeah, exactly. But if you were to play Black Sun Filter on it, it would have area effect 2. If you were to play Gun Drones on it, it would have area effect 4. But if you were to just play gun drones on it, it would have area effect 4. So Black Sun Filter, if generally Tau units don't have a lot of hit points, they're going to be pretty susceptible to being destroyed. If I had a choice between Borkon Recruits A that does not have an attachment and Borkon Recruits B that has Black Sun Filter on it, I'd kill the one with a Black Sun Filter. So if these units aren't surviving multiple combats, if the enemy warlord is not committing to their same planet multiple times, you're not generating more than one resource. Switching out a card for one resource is generally seen to be an unfavorable trade, just because a lot of players value cards as being worth 2 resources. This is like Warp Storm immunity if we really want to dig in the bottom of the barrel or bucket for corner cases for this card. But if you really don't want your opponents to trigger Black Sun Filter, don't send your warlord to the planet where they're going to activate it or try to predict where their warlord is going to go. So maybe in a perfect world, you're going to be able to trigger this multiple times. But I just have to say, if your opponent is so awful that they allow you to trigger this multiple times, then you are probably destined to win the game from the outset. So
yeah, and the other thing that works against it is part of the cool thing about Shadow Sun is you can get attachments in for free. You get the discount on the attachments, whereas this, there's no discount to getting this in with her ability, and Tau are generally hurting for resources either. You know what I mean? Yeah. They've got a really strong command game. They've got cheap units. If this was like a weaker built-in Primal How, it'd be awesome. If it was after an enemy warlord commits to a planet with this attachment is attached to a unit, draw 2 cards, it'd be awesome. But it is not that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's worth saying that you can attach this to an enemy army unit. So if you know your opponent's warlord is going to be going to, say, planet number 1, you could put this on something in their HQ. You're guaranteed to hit with your Black Sun Filter. If your opponent shows up at planet number 1, the unit gets swept up in their HQ. You're guaranteed to earn another resource off of this. But I almost feel bad for saying that because I feel like it gives this card some kind of hope, and not to be completely just ragging on this card, but it's just not powerful enough. It's too slow. It doesn't do that much, and I don't think the Tau are powerful enough as a faction, unfortunately, where you can risk running a card like this.
Yeah, but I never thought of that. It is an interesting point. I never even thought of doing it, but yeah, why don't you you're out a lot of money, then you put this on a unit in their HQ. When they commit to a planet, you gain a resource to play the superiority you have in your hand.
Right.
So there's that. So Davis, let me know how that play works.
Yeah, I was gonna say when you were on the Concast, you were talking about making the worst deck ever for Davis to win a tournament with.
Deck. Yeah, I'm putting this in there. So Davis, if you're listening, this is going in.
Fantastic. So, I guess as disappointing as this card is, there's not much to say about it. Lore-wise, the Black Sun Filter allows someone to see at night. It filters out bright flares that could be otherwise blinding. So
the lore is underwhelming, just like the card.
Exactly. So I'm sure in an actual combat situation, this could be invaluable if you're dealing with flashbang grenades or you fire rifles that are, superheated plasma or whatever else. But the card doesn't do it for me, and so not a fan. But Sam, last card of the Scourge War Pack, second of the Warlord cycle, lead us through Kauyan Strike.
Yes, it is the 1-cost event, 2 shields. It is loyal. It is a tactic, and it has the combat action: move 1 or more ethereal units you control to a target planet. this was good for On-Chi when it came out. It's still solid as hell. I mean, not good. It's better than good. It's a great card for On-Chi, and it's still a great card for On-Chi. This is a 3 of in every On-Chi deck, and you better hope you see this, and you better hope you see Orbital Cities to have any prayer. Really strong card in On-Chi. Outside of On-Chi, you don't see it. I mean, the only ethereal that you even see rarely is the Ennui Prelate, just for its ambush ability. And you don't see that outside of On-Chi too much. And even if you did, how many you're really going to play that you'd need to move them? So you don't see it outside of him. But for On-Chi, it's a staple, absolute auto include still to this day.
Yeah, I've got to say the biggest thing that held this card back is when it came out on She was not released yet.
Correct.
But it's a hell of a thing. You move your Ethereal Warlord to a planet, like let's say you win a battle at planet number 1, you move your Warlord to planet number 2, you trigger another battle at that planet, and then maybe you use your orbital cities to bounce yourself all over the place. You trigger many, many battles each round. You can kind of condense all of your ethereals onto one planet. You can get them all in one place. Then you can drop a prelate into play. They all get one big global attack bonus. So it allows all sorts of relocation shenaniganry that makes On-Chi an extraordinarily fun and interesting warlord to both play and spectate and commentate for. So it's another big unpredictable element that makes On-Chi into a threatening presence, because otherwise, like, man, without Kauyon Strike and without Orbital City, On-Chi would just be the most predictable, boring thing on the planet. But this definitely adds a new level of excitement to that warlord. But, really, it's like this may as well be a signature card, because you're not going to be using this with any other warlord.
Yeah.
This is actually one of 2 main Tau faction tactics, the other being the Montka strike, which we'll look at when we eventually get around to doing look back at the packs for the Planetfall cycle of war packs. Who knows when we'll get around to doing that.
Yeah.
But Kauyon means the patient hunter, and it's essentially an ambush strategy. So you lure your enemy into a killing zone, and it's designed where you can take advantage of everything at your disposal. And sometimes this is such a sophisticated and refined type of strategy where you've got so many layers of trickery and deceit that your enemy maybe only realizes that they're walking into a trap or ambush until, they're being fired upon and they're destroyed, and it's far, far too late. So the Tau really prefer planned assaults and tactful coordination when possible to spare, the lives of their citizenry and their just people. So I guess kind of something else worth mentioning about the Tau is they don't so much value capturing ground or holding territory or enslaving populations or anything like that. They just prefer to absolutely annihilate and obliterate their enemies. And as is depicted on the card art, it's basically just being, it's some orc boys just being blasted into pieces by bombs being dropped from some sort of Tau flyer. So interesting bit of lore there, interesting card, absolute staple in On-Chi, but essentially worthless with any other warlord. But Sam, looking back at this pack as a whole, what do you think about the Scourge?
Well, I think it's a really good pack. Well, that might not be right. I really like the pack. Let's put it that way. I think that if you want to play Ku'gath, you should get this thing. I love Ku'gath. He's one of my favorite warlords to play. He's actually, I'm looking at the data right now, he is my second most played warlord. Mitch, can you guess who my first most played warlord is?
I would assume Zarather?
You would assume incorrectly. It is. I was kind of shocked by this too. It's Shadow Sun.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. You did a lot of practice for last year's Worlds.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that's true, but I haven't played her in forever, but I guess she's it shows how hard I hammered her for the month of September and October.
I was going to say, wore her out.
Yes, wore her out. But no, I really like Ku'gath. He's really fun to play. Like we said, he can go toe-to-toe. So, he's fun. If you like Space Marines, you can pass on this pack. You should probably pick it up if you like Astra Militarum, Iron Guard recruits. Inquisitorial Fortress, so 2 out of the 3 are very strong, almost auto-includes. Orks, you may want to pass. The only thing here you really see is Custom Field Generator, but as we talked about, it's losing steam a little bit. Daka, maybe. Dark Eldar, this is a no-brainer just for the Clavex War Leader. Very strong card. For Eldar, it's kind of a not so great pack. I mean, Black Guardians, maybe in Farrenhall, but the other 2 are pretty much passes. And then, Tau, Borkin Recruits, and Koyan Strike are both solid. So you can put your Black Sun filter in your, in your binder or your bookmark, slot. But, so I think overall it's an okay pack. But I have fun with Ku'gath, and that alone makes it a must-buy for me.
Yeah, certainly the Warlord is very cool, very fun. Not what I would consider to be tier 1, but
No.
I don't think it would take too much for him to become quite a bit stronger. It seems like in this game, it's just maybe a card or 2 can definitely help a Warlord rise to a A4 unseen level of power and standing relative to his peers. I think the absolute standout for this pack is Clavex War Leader.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tau gets some pretty decent stuff, but the rest of it, it's like some of these are absolute just glorious staples, and then a lot of them are just kind of stinky. Like the Iron Guard Recruits is underwhelming as a card as that is, because it's like, oh, it's a 2-cost, 2-command icon, 1/2 with no useful traits. It's like I wouldn't really dream of having Travis McDaniel build a Broderick War deck for me that did not have 3 of that card in it. So it may not seem super powerful, but it's incredibly good, and I think there are a few cards like that kind of sprinkled throughout, like Borkon Recruits.
Right.
Can't go wrong with that. Kalyan Strike, if you're on Shi, then it is a mandatory purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for on Chi and Dark Eldar, this is a must-buy. But otherwise, you can probably kind of just take it or leave it at your discretion. But I would encourage, well, obviously we encourage buying everything that FFG makes Conquest related. But, if you're on a budget or you're starting out, you're new to the game, I say pick it up because Ku'gath's really fun.
Yeah, so I suppose that's it. You've heard Sam and I say our piece. I figured this would be a little bit shorter episode than usual. Turns out my prediction was quite wrong.
No, I think it's going to be. I'm at 2 hours and 40 minutes here on my recording file, and that you have to edit some things out. So it'll be a little shorter than the the ones we normally do, but still longer than anyone else's. So.
Sure. Well, dear viewers, be sure to let Sam and I know what you think of Ku'gath and all of the non-signature cards of the Scourge in the comments. How were they then and how are they now? Do your opinions differ from Sam and I? A little bit of disagreement is always nice, so differing opinions help us all to become better players. So Sam and I love engaging and interacting with you viewers. It makes the show much more interesting. If you've got any discussion topics, feel free to leave us suggestions. Maybe one day it would be nice to take a short reprieve or break from doing the back-to-back war pack analyses. So let us know what you'd like to hear about in the comments section below. But I guess, Sam, anything that you'd like to get off your chest or forever hold your peace as we close the episode?
Well, yeah, I will say, if these releases ever quit coming, I guess we had our one chance here to take a break from a pack review. We did a look back at the pack review or redo review, but we do have plans to do another one of these throwdowns that we've done in the past. So those have always been fun, and hopefully we'll get one of those out sometime this summer here. So Thanks for listening, and it's interesting. When we preview cards, we're always like, "Oh, this looks good," and well, this looks okay. It's very rare do we say this card looks like shit, and now that we're kind of looking back at this pack, I don't know, maybe this was a shitty pack, although I gave it an endorsement to go purchase, but it's there's a lot of duds in here, so, I don't know. That's why we do these, though, because it's fun to see how, time changes perspective and how the meta changes, which, values more or less certain cards. So, like Mitch said, let us know what you guys think.
Yeah, it's funny. Like nowadays, we'll get a spoiler article, and I feel like I have to be the optimistic member of the community, where I have to be like filled with hope, and like, oh, this card could be good. Like you guys, some people in the community just instantly shit on stuff when it comes out, and I have to be like, well, let's see if it's any good, and just kind of pussyfoot around and walk on tiptoes and be the eternal FFG and Brad Andrews fanboy. And then looking back, it's like, okay, the honeymoon's over. Like, this card sucks, this one's terrible, I've never seen this one. So it's like I feel like I'm maybe a little bit more realistic in hindsight.
Yeah,
but,
the honeymoon is over, baby.
Yeah, I do feel like it's probably good for me to be optimistic about at least something in life. So, but it was a lot of fun to look back. Again, thank you all so much for listening to another episode of the Tyrantcast. We're now 18. We're officially legal. So thank you for following us on this long, strange journey so far. I guess just a real quick personal story. It reminds me of when a friend of mine, Matt's, turned 18. We bought a cake for him, and it was supposed to say legal at last on it. And the person who did the cake writing and frosting spelled it legal as like 20,000 leagues under the sea. So it was like legal at last. And man, it was just a mess. But
legal, hey, 18 years, you're finally legal. So
yeah, exactly. So we've made it. Thank you all for making it this far. As always, interact with Sam and I on Facebook, on Twitter. If at any point you feel like giving back to the Tyrantcast, to the Hive Tyrant channel, I would be deeply appreciative were you to make even $1 a month donation to my Patreon page. It all goes into improving the audio and video quality of the stuff that I produce. It's a very budget setup we've got going here, so maybe someday we will see that Hive Tyrant Studios dream. And but thank you all so much for listening, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come, and have a good one.